You probably want me to turn my phone off too.
Okay, it's 12:30, so we'll begin in just a moment. Okay, I think we'll begin the meeting now. I've been asked to pinch hit for Kat, who's on her way. And so we have a quorum here, so let's begin. Calling the meeting to order. We'll start with items of interest from commissioners. Anyone have an item of interest? Chris.
So I will happily note that about 2 weeks ago, City Council cast the final vote on the bike parking zoning,
Okay.
and it went through largely as we recommended it. So that's great news.
Fantastic. Thanks for reporting back. Other items of interest? Okay, Director Durbin, you have a report?
Great. Good afternoon. Yes, as Commissioner Smith noted, the City Council has been busy on a number of the items that the Planning and Sustainability Commission have been working on. In addition to the bike parking code being adopted, the Rossi Farms resolution moved forward, and the family received the signal that the city would like to see them continue to cooperate and work together and hopefully find an opportunity to partner. We also had the residential infill work session, and we walked through the racist history of planning and zoning for Portland. Both were the history conversation was very well received. And then the climate team walked through the 100% renewables report for council as well. This week is also busy, so that was all last week. This week is also busy. We have the Better Housing by Design vote tomorrow. And we have the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments coming in place tomorrow, and after which BPS will start our phase 2 of the zoning code amendments to consider limits to transloading facilities and the storage of some of these fuels, including crude. Both of those efforts will come to Planning and Sustainability Commission later this year, or later next year, 2020. And lastly, the mayor also had a press conference and a press event on climate issues and announced commitment to roll out new policies that BPS will be responsible for developing. One specifically working in collaboration with the facilities and fleets. We're working on an EV first policy to accelerate the city's conversion to electric fleet. We are also working with the revenue division on adopting a climate test and an internal price on carbon. We'll be working with the revenue division as well to work on establishing a local offset fund. So new policy will be requiring city air travel to be offset, and then we'll be working with revenue to develop a local offset fund for those revenues to be invested in carbon reducing activities in Portland. That's something that we hope to open up to other partners as well, not just city. And I think what was the last thing? And then to work with OMF on facilities on energy efficiency investments for buildings. So we'll be partnering on some of those projects, hopefully through the budget process, and having support for a energy audit and assessment. So the mayor has tasked us with some internal kind of ways that we're aligning the City of Portland's commitment to climate, applying a climate lens to our decision making, and making sure that we're accelerating our own conversion to reducing emissions. So BPS will be working on many of these policies in partnership with our other bureau partners, and we'll share more as that advances. And lastly, this is the final meeting of the year. Just wanted to thank everybody for your commitment, time, energy, and engagement. It's a pleasure to work with all of you, and I'm looking forward to the next year. So thank you.
Thank you. I have one question I had is the climate emergency proposal that Michelle Krim summarized for us, is that weaving its way towards City Hall, or is there any information on that?
Our team continues to partner with community-based organizations, frontline communities, youth-based organizations. So that is still in process. I don't know what the timing will be. We'll have, I think, more clarity around that early next year.
Thanks. All right, the first on our agenda today is the River District Master Street Plan update, and I'm not sure who's bringing that to us. So surprise us. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. Thank you.
I'll move the consent agenda.
Would you like to move adoption of the minutes?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. All opposed? Minutes have been adopted. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah, Mike. All right, now we're up for the River District.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Nick Falbo. I'm a Senior Transportation Planner with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, bringing to you as part of a briefing on a proposed update to the River District Master Street Plan. I had an update of this distributed. You should have this document. This is what we're talking about today. This presentation will kind of give a high-level overview of what master street plans are, where they fit into what we try to do at the Bureau of Transportation, and why we're here to share with you on this update. So master street plans are a piece of our transportation system plan, our citywide transportation system plan, and it is fundamentally a requirement of our state transportation planning rule number 12 to plan for a local system of streets, arterials, collector, and local roads. This is really important because it helps increase the efficiency of our transportation system. You may be familiar with Portland and its famous 200-foot grid network of streets that are in our old central city as well as our older neighborhoods, but that starts to break down as you get into the older parts of our city. So we've developed a series of maps that help tell us the future of our street network for our transportation system in a lot of different parts of town. But not everywhere. So we have master street plan areas in our TSP for generally high growth areas or underdeveloped areas. So this includes areas such as the River District, which includes Old Town and the Pearl District. We have master street plans for South Waterfront. These are areas we're expecting to see a lot of new growth, and so this can become a framework that helps make that growth happen in the way that we want. We also have master street plans for Gateway Regional Center, for Outer East Portland, for Southwest Portland, and designed to help us create connections that don't exist and create a more pedestrian-friendly, bicycle-friendly street network in areas where we don't have it today. One of the most successful examples of this is actually here in the River District from an earlier version of this map, which is watching the Pearl District change over the last 25 years. This is an aerial image of 1995 of the Pearl District. You can see back then it was a rail yard. You can see north of Lovejoy there was no buildings, no streets, and it was this map that helped create the future neighborhood that we have today. Here it is now, 2018. It's done a great job of identifying where new streets should go, where new connections should be, and much of this has been built as a part of redevelopment. As buildings come in, as sites get redeveloped, they build a lot of this public infrastructure for us. You'll notice, though, there is kind of a missing piece in our street network. This is the post office site, just a few blocks from here. This is one of the remaining spots in the Pearl District and the River District that has a sort of a disconnected street grid that we want to build through redevelopment. To make that happen, we have this ongoing master planning process. It was called for the United States Post Office site. It was called the Broadway Corridor Master Plan. It's advancing into the Design Commission as the USPS Master Plan. And we get caught in a little bit of an updating loop where the master plan must conform to the master street plan, but the master plan is exploring ideas that aren't necessarily fully realized in the master street plan. The proposal for the USPS site is to break these 12 acres into a series of tall buildings with a new street grid that travels through the site. The street grid would reflect much of the street grid that is on the ground today, with a few notable exceptions. Some of these streets are full streets, some of these streets are pedestrian streets, and some of these parcels are, in this case, you can see sort of an extension of the North Park blocks as one large park as a central feature in this site. The current master street plan is a part of our transportation system plan. It was adopted in 2018, and it doesn't look that different. We're making kind of minor updates to this plan. This was updated to reflect the work of the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan, and what I'm bringing to you all is an update to reflect the latest thinking as that has gone from a framework plan into the actual master plan site. The key changes that are coming, there's basically 3 of them. There is a change to Northwest Kearney Street, which in the previous plan was a pedestrian-only street. In the new proposal is a full street connection. There's a removal of this sort of frontage road that parallels the Broadway viaduct on the way up to the Broadway Bridge. That's no longer needed in the site. We'll have a new street, Park Avenue, that will provide access in the north and south direction. And then a removal of a link here along Irving Street, which was a pedestrian connection proposed, but it cuts through that park block extension, but the Portland Parks Bureau wants to have that as a large parcel to create more large park experience, and the specifics of kind of circulation through that site will be developed as a part of a future parks master planning process. These are the 3 key changes that we anticipate making with this master plan, and we're bringing it to you because this is a sort of a formal land use action. One of the key changes I just wanted to get into a little bit of detail is on Northwest Kearney Street. It was proposed as a pedestrian connection. Kearney to the west is a pedestrian connection today. I think the original framework was you would extend that, but the site plan for the master plan, as it developed, there was concern from the Design Commission that that would be too much of kind of a underused alley. They want to have the primary pedestrian route through the site be at Johnson Street as a main street, and so they didn't feel like it made sense to have this pedestrian-oriented, pedestrianized block just tucked into the north without active street frontages. So they encouraged the team to shift that into more of a full street connection that goes from 9th Avenue to Station Way, so that there were more eyes on the street on what would largely be a way of accessing the driveways and parking garages for the buildings. So today I'm here to brief you and let you know that we're doing this, hear any questions or concerns you might have. We look forward to coming back with a hearing for a recommendation from you, and we are looking to bring this to council for adoption in March, in parallel with the ongoing USPS master plan site review from the Design Commission. And I'm happy to take any questions or answer any comments or questions you have.
Thank you, Nick. So this is a very two-dimensional map, and in the area of the post office site, things are definitely three-dimensional. We've got 2 ramps that lead up to the bridge. Could you just, taking the streets from Irving, Johnson, Kearney, and that little dotted line that appears to align with the bridge, tell us what's connecting with Broadway at grade and what's going underneath?
That is a great question. There are a few lines on this map. You're right, it is very two-dimensional. You'll notice a few kind of dotted lines crossing NATO. Those are envisioned as overcrossings. So we've got some examples where the three-dimensional connection is what's implied by our two-dimensional drawing. There is an important piece of the Broadway corridor USPS site plan, not particularly visible in this drawing, but it's a part of the green loop. So to bring a 6-mile active transportation loop through our central city, it is a core piece of the USPS site plan. And I'll see if I can point it out on this drawing, but the green loop is currently planned to go up Park Avenue to sort of climb, zigzag. We've got to make some grade to meet up with the bridge at the kind of the northern terminus of the new extension of the park blocks, to then carry as a structure up 8th Avenue and connect to the bridgehead, that kind of diagonal point where Lovejoy and Broadway branch off from the Broadway Bridge would be a new landing for this sort of diagonal entrance into the USPS site. And so you can see kind of this diagonal connector on the master street plan. And that would be a landing and a connection to 8th and then a transition down to Park.
Okay, so again, Irving, Jefferson, and Kearney, do they meet Broadway at grade or do they go under?
So yes, Kearney and Johnson would be vehicular access streets. They would go under the Broadway viaduct and connect to Station Way, 9th to Station Way. And then Irving, there would be an access point from the Broadway viaduct to Irving to access some parking garages, but it would not connect all the way through the site, and it would not connect to 8th. It's just a little stub of an access point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I sat on the Broadway Corridor Advisory Committee, and the last meeting I attended, there was quite a lot of discussion about the alignment, the green loop alignment. Has that all been resolved at this point in terms of what you described as being the accepted?
Yes, that as I've described, that is what's advancing to Design Commission. It's got the support of the Parks Bureau as an integrated piece of the future park, and the support of the site plan as far as how it connects to the bridge and interacts with the buildings.
Can you share the role of our commission and the design commission in this process? I've not reviewed a master plan yet, and it seems like we're working with them on another project, as you might have heard. What are our roles in recommending?
I'll share from my understanding of it, and there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen with projects such as this. From my understanding, Courtney might be able to help answer some questions, but
I'll let you go first.
As a land use action, this master street plan is coming to your body for a hearing and a recommendation. Ultimately, would be brought to City Council also for their adoption as an ordinance in the way that it changes our expectations and rules for developers for the street grid that they should be helping us build. The master plan proposal itself is going to the Design Commission for their hearing and recommendation, and I don't believe that goes to City Council. It stays within the Design Commission. So these are interconnected regulatory items, but different pieces kind of belong with different bodies. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and as a PSC member, I did raise the question several times during the Broadway corridor discussions of whether we would have an opportunity to at least see what the recommendations were. Obviously, the Design Commission is the final arbiter on that. Is there any plan to brief the PSC at some point? Just curious.
I'm not sure. I'm happy I'll go upstairs, check with our Prosper Portland's leading this process, and I'm happy to share with them the interest of PSC in hearing more.
I would request that when it comes back to us, understanding the dynamics between having a pedestrian route versus a full street, and I would think that nowadays we wouldn't be setting up a whole street face for cars going in and out, and that's a dead zone. So I want to see that piece of the puzzle, because that is part of our recommendation, right, is what the street designation is?
Correct.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Thanks. This is the handoff. You are now.
I'm like, can I talk? You can continue to run this one. How about that? Did you start it, Eli? Yes. Okay. Okay. I do have and if you've already explained this, because I was late, you don't have to re-explain it. I'll circle back with you after. Many of the master plans throughout the city are bringing in new streets. So does that mean all of those proposals, street plans will come through here?
Can you give an example that you're thinking of?
Sure. OMSI got a master plan that's putting in new streets. And if
Right.
and then if they're not, what's unique about this one? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, so for the uniqueness on this one is that, so this is Courtney Duke, I'm also a senior planner with PBOT, is that there's an existing master plan that is a land use action adopted in the transportation system plan for this area. There is not a current master street plan for that part of the Central East Side in OMSI right now. So this master street plan was developed in the early what do we call that, early 2000s, late 90s, when we were doing the River District. And so because it's a requirement at the state level, we need to make that change through Planning Commission and City Council. I don't know enough about the OMSI work right now, but that area of town does not have a master street plan due to it, probably because it was such a large private development at the time, and so it didn't meet the connectivity, it met the connectivity standards at the time when we were looking at master street plans as a whole. My theory, not knowing much about that site, is that as a part of the master plan and development agreement, there will be streets and pathways shown as a part of that as one unit. Does that need to be adopted separately as a master street plan through Planning Commission? I don't know the answer to that, and I can find out. But I think because it's already one big private development, I would think it's similar to Conway, that Conway didn't have a separate master street plan out in Northwest, didn't have one because, again, it met the connectivity standards at the time because of the large private property. When Conway came in, we did a whole street plan as a part of that specific development. So partly is because there's already one for this area that this new master plan is laying on top of, and we made a change to it, is why we needed to come here. So I think you would see that as a part of the OMSI development, but we can make sure to follow up on that.
Thanks. I'm not trying to put requirements on projects that don't need them. I'm just trying to
We
understand.
had similar conversations as to why this would come through, and like, again, Conway didn't, because the streets met it, we were putting new things through, and because the grid in Northwest is pretty tight, we were able to just show those streets connecting to existing streets. Again, when this was first developed, there were no streets at all, right? There was the big rail yards, and we had an MOU to develop it to show how we would do that through, because a lot of the River District was developed by subdivision, right, as one big subdivision under a memorandum of understanding. So that's how it's a little bit different.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Other questions? What's that? Oh,
No, that's okay. My question's more planning, not sort of P-BOT questions.
okay. Any other questions? If not, I think that's it, unless you have anything else for us, Nick.
No,
job,
that's it.
first time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Nice work. Thank you both. Next item on the agenda is the design overlay zone amendments. I've got a few things to go over before we start this item. I do want to note that we have 3 hours for this work session, and again, this is a work session. It should be noted that I personally have a hard stop at 4. I'm going to have to leave the dais a little before that, so if we're not completed for any reason, I'll be doing another handoff. We're covering 3 parts of DOZA today. The parts that we're covering include a continuing conversation regarding Guideline 6, the process amendments, and some of the design standards. We're not going to go through all of them, but we will take up some of them. So BPS staff, Laura Lillard, Phil Nameny, Sandra Wood, Phil, will orient us and keep us on track for today's discussion. I believe also, I'm not seeing her at the moment, but Julie Livingston, who is a design commissioner, will be in the audience today. The Design Commission's next work session on this topic is on Thursday, this coming Thursday. Disclosure, at the last meeting, commissioners shared the potential conflict of interest. While it's not clear whether the proposed changes create a potential conflict of interest for PSC members because the changes affect such a broad class of property owners, in the interest of transparency, we have the following declarations. Commissioner Smith owns property in the design overlay zone. Commissioners Schultz, Spivak, Bortolazzo, and Lawrence Spence work for architectural or development firms who conduct work in Portland. And believe it's time to pass it off to you. We're getting started a little bit early, so it's okay if you need a few minutes to get organized.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Sandra Wood. I'm with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Nice to see you all today. And we're continuing the DOZA work session today. and have three things on the agenda. The first is the Design Guideline 6, and as if you recall, the design guidelines are not within the purview of the PSC. This is within the purview of the Design Commission, and the PSC has provided testimony to the Design Commission, and we promised them we would follow up with a few paragraphs around some of the suggestions that we had. So we're going to start with that, and our objective today is to have a conversation so we can provide some addendum to our testimony. So that's the first item. The second item that we're going to discuss are the design standards, and I'll give you an update when we get to that point of where the standards working group is, because they met a couple weeks ago, and we have the benefit of their thinking for the quality and resilience tenet. So we'll talk about that. And the third item on our agenda today is the process, which is how design review works and the process that design review goes through. So we'll have a few people coming up and aiding us in this conversation. With me today is Laura Lillard, who's our lead on the guidelines discussion for design review, and Phil Naimany, who's our colleague who's the lead on the standards and the code, and Stacy Monroe is here from Bureau of Development Services. We also have our consultant, Shem, who is from Decca Architects. So that's where we're going to talk about standards first, so he can help us in that conversation. He's been helping the standards working group. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and we'll get started with Guideline 6, so we can wrap up that conversation. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so for Guideline 6, you should have a handout that looks like this. I'm going to walk us through where we are and what is the status of Guideline 6. Sandra mentioned a little bit about this. The first work session with the PSC on November 12th was to discuss your testimony to the Design Commission about the Portland Citywide Design Guidelines. They are the recommending body for design guidelines. So to summarize where you landed as a commission on Guideline 6, I'll read from your letter of testimony dated November 15th. Guideline 6, provide opportunities to pause, sit, and interact. The discussion around this guideline was one of the most robust of our work session. Understanding we are talking about private property here, we still want to ensure the openness and welcoming factors contribute to the development. Specific to the phrasing of the guideline itself, we suggest making it even more clear that development should provide supportive space for people to feel welcome and safe, and should allow space for people to rest, especially under our current housing shortage. And then there's a quote, quotations of the guideline itself. Guideline 6, provide opportunities to rest and be welcome. And that was your suggested change. Your letter continues, the definition of rest was quite involved. We think the background should address this more fully and clarify the intent of the word. The PSC will talk about this further at our November 19th, 2019 work session, and will provide suggested language to the Design Commission after our discussion, end quote. As you may recall, Commissioner Manera had offered to send additional language for the background, but we did not leave time on our last work session, as we had stated in your letter, to discuss the suggested language. So that's why we're taking it up now. The purpose of the discussion today is to provide an opportunity to clarify your testimony to the Design Commission on Design Guideline 6. And the handout in front of you is a copy of the Portland Citywide Design Guidelines proposal from the Table of Contents and Design Guideline 6 on pages 38 and 39. So to make it easier for navigation, I've just handwritten the suggested language from Commissioner Manera on Post-it notes, photocopied directly on page 38. After these comments were sent out, Commissioner Spivak had an edit to the second suggested note. So that's why you see the cross out and the edit to language on number 2. So again, the proposed draft of the Portland Citywide Design Guidelines, including this guideline, is now in the hands of the Design Commission. They will be discussing the public realm guidelines 5, 6, and 7 on Thursday. But as we had promised in November, we wanted to give you this opportunity to clarify your testimony that we can include as an addendum to the Design Commission. And so I will stop there for discussion.
So I would suggest that we give Oriana the opportunity to talk through her proposal and then open it up from there, if the rest of my commissioners are supportive of that. Thank you, Oriana.
Thank you, Chair Schultz. So I'd like to start by giving a little bit of a sense of where this recommendation is coming from philosophically and practically. Talk a little bit about what I would intend it to do, and then finally talk about what it means more broadly in terms of a greater conversation and the role that this commission plays. And I'll try to be brief, understanding that we have a hard stop potentially and a lot of things to cover today. So I think this gets to the heart of what we mean when we talk about public realm. We aren't only talking about the users who are inside a building, the folks who occupy a space or live in a space, but acknowledging that buildings have both an interior and exterior quality to them, and that there are folks who don't necessarily ever go inside a building who interact with that exterior quality every day in various forms. And it's worth also noting that the community design guidelines include the language rest as well, so there's potentially some instance of parallelism here in terms of including the word rest, and I don't know the intentionality behind that document in terms of where rest came from. But I think it is worth acknowledging that there's someone else who has perhaps had some similar thinking in terms of how we address the temporality of the spaces that we have outside of buildings. I want to also acknowledge that the public doesn't only include folks who are sheltered in some way, who work in buildings, but it also includes folks who are unhoused and unsheltered. And that gets to the heart at what I am trying to get at here, is acknowledging that we have a housing shortage, that there are folks who use the architecture of buildings as safe places to sleep on private property sometimes or in the right-of-way, and that we may have to consider that as we move forward in terms of how we think about how buildings are designed, and acknowledging both the uses that were perhaps initially intended, but also the uses that are also the reality of the situation that we're in. And I hope that this recommendation in the design guideline would build in some of that intentionality and reality into the way that we do our work and the signals that we send to designers of buildings. I want to acknowledge the rights of private property holders, that this is in no way requiring that private property holders allow folks to sleep on their private property, but simply acknowledging that there are some folks who are interested and willing to do that. And that we not only need to provide a toolkit that makes that easier to build those relationships across communities between the people who are inside of buildings and the folks who use the architecture of buildings on the exterior, but also to, again, address that reality and intentionality in our design. I think thinking more broadly and long-term, this is the start of a very important conversation that we need to have. I think some other commissioners in this space may feel that this is mission creep, and this is addressing issues that get outside of land use. But without getting into the research I've done, I did some consideration of how folks who are unhoused are impacted by land use, and it's quite a bit. And I think this is potentially the start of a very important conversation that we can have both as a commission, and I hope that will lead into some of the work that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability does to think about how buildings and land use affects both the folks who are in the structures that are built through those land use guidelines and then the folks who are potentially using land in different kinds of ways. I think that's an impactful conversation, and one that in my experience over the past few weeks has shown me that there are folks who have felt seen and heard by this commission in a way that they never thought would happen before, and that this conversation we're having today, regardless of how it plays out, is incredibly powerful in terms of bringing more voices into this space and sending a welcoming signal, not just potentially through the design that may be affected by this conversation, but through the work that we do today. And I'm happy to answer questions from folks about what I mean more or give more context, but also want to give space to other commissioners to speak. Thank you.
Oriana, I do have a question for you. Thank you for providing that context. So there was edits proposed to your proposed edits. I guess one question would be, are you accepting of those edits or not accepting of those edits? So I'm just trying to figure out where we're starting the discussion.
Thank you, Chair Schultz. I'm accepting of the edits to number 2 on your document that came from Commissioner Spivak, and also would actually make a recommendation of my own to number 1. I think that the language "who may pass by or choose to stay for a while" potentially goes a little bit farther than my initial intentionality in this work, and I would recommend ending the sentence after "any member of the public" and removing those final words in order to be more clear that, again, this is not an incredibly prescriptive issue, and that there are aspects of this conversation that go outside of the work that we do as a commission, but instead we're sending signals to folks who are designing buildings around how the exteriority of those buildings may be used, and potentially creating more opportunities for interactions that may be happening anyway.
Okay, thank you. So with that common understanding of what we're discussing, is there anybody else who would like to add to the discussion at this point, or comments regarding these suggested changes to the backgrounds? Yes, Chris.
Well, I was interested to learn after our debate last time on this topic that the word rest is already in some of the guidelines. And it seems to me if we move from rest to sit, that we're essentially, even if only tacitly, accepting that we're going to help manage our houseless problem by making our public spaces within private development less accommodating. And that's not a statement I'd like to make about our society of how we're going to deal with that. So I think continuing to use the word rest as we have in the past is an important thing to do.
Thank you. Jeff?
Well, I have absolutely no idea what we meant in the past when we said rest and how the Design Review Commission handled that issue. So I'm not sure how helpful that is in terms of expressing what this commission means by rest today. And so I guess since I was in the minority on this issue, I'm probably not going to be proposing any language, but I guess I would just ask the question that was more clearly put on the table when the rest language was adopted several weeks ago. It was intended, as I understood it, to direct design review when they were reviewing the design of these, I'll call them quasi-public open spaces, that they should be designed in a way that they could accommodate people who need to sleep or pitch a tent. Those was expressly stated. So I guess my question, and I'll ask you, Oriana, as the main proposer, is that what we expect the Design Review Commission to do? When they review the design of a plaza or an open space or an entryway, they should be looking to see where it might accommodate a tent, where and how it'll accommodate people who want to sleep. Is that what we expect from the word rest?
Can I just quickly jump in? And
Yeah.
I do want you to have a moment. For what it's worth, in reading the way the background language has been provided, I don't see anywhere in this background language that's being proposed that says that. So if I was a professional reading this and having to respond to this, I wouldn't take this to tell me that I have to do that. So I guess if that is your intent, then we're not getting at it through the language that you propose, but generally, for what it's worth, with the edits that's been made, I'm accepting of your proposed background changes.
I'm actually curious, Chair Schultz, before I answer Commissioner Bachrach's question, how you would read this language now and how you would potentially solve for the problem you feel like it presents.
If you give me a second to think through my answer to that, I'm happy to do so. Just want to be thoughtful. I think, so if I'm reading the first edit that you've suggested here, which is after, well, the sentence is, let's try to get at it from the beginning. Successful spaces are those that support a variety of interrelated activities, engage a diverse public, and result in vibrant streets and sidewalks. Those spaces not only serve and support the people who work and live in a private building, but welcome engagement from any member of the public. If I'm reading this sentence, or a couple of sentences, I'm reading that this is about the interaction of public space, the sidewalks or the right-of-way, and private space. And I think one of the main tenets of design review has been to always make sure that a building is supportive of a variety of activities within the public realm. And that this statement, so for example, active use along a window wall and not just having a solid wall, which isn't necessarily inviting for the public to interact with the building, or vice versa. It doesn't encourage people or occupants within a building to interact or understand or support what's happening on the street. So to me, I'm reading it suggesting that those two need to coalesce and work together. Is that your intent with that one? Maybe we take it one by one. It looks like Ben wants to jump in with his thoughts on that as well.
I think the conversation that we're having right now, to me, kind of proves the point that we're not really clear about what the intent is. And I think it's important to be as clear as possible. So to that end, the way we word this guideline matters. So I think that the word resting is not providing great clarity, and it leads to, it's open to misinterpretation. So while I can support 1 and 2, and I think I agree with Kat's interpretation that this is really about the relationship between private property and public property, and I agree in principle that the spaces that private property can create are not necessarily just solely for the use of the people that live or work in that place, but also for others that may want to interact with it. I think what's not reflected here is the discussion that we're having. So there's really not a clarity here. What's the real intent? Are we providing space for people to stay for much longer, to spend the night, or not? So I was, just like Jeff mentioned, I was in the minority before that, and I think I'm still having a hard time with the word resting. I think the two stickers that we have here, these three amendments make sense, but I think the word resting is still leading this to pretty clear misinterpretation. That's not really clear. So as a designer, I would have a hard time. We've been, all of us, looking at this for quite a while now, and we're still debating what it actually means, which tells me it's not clear.
Eli?
Well, I'm not an architect or a designer, but I'll share one idea of how to implement would be if you're doing a bench seating area, you would not put a metal ridge that sticks up 3 inches every 1.5 feet. And I think of this as an example where when I worked at a nonprofit in Vancouver, and one of the board members was confined to a wheelchair, and she felt that every time she saw a house with one step up to the front door, it was like someone flicking under the finger. And even if it's not the house she's going to, it felt like unwelcome. She could not get into that front door. And we didn't get to hear from people who are unhoused in the deliberations on this, and I think it'd be great to have their perspective. But I could totally see, even if you're not going to sit on a bench, seeing something that just it makes someone feel unwelcome. And so I think that's one way that this could be interpreted, is not to create situations like that.
Please, Oriana.
So thank you for that discussion. I think to come back to the question that was initially posed to me, and I think this discussion has actually helped to get a little more at that clarity. I think what Eli just raised is kind of getting at some of the heart of that. And at our last meeting, we had a presentation from the sustainability side who raised the idea of targeted universalism, which is this idea that you can make decisions in policy or programs that are designed to support one community, and in particular communities who tend to be frontline or marginalized or oppressed in some way, but that there will be broader benefits long term. And I think that some of the broad language I've used here that may be getting to some of the lack of clarity we had was intended around that idea of targeted universalism. That if we are designing in ways that may be supportive of someone resting for a longer period of time, camping under an awning or sleeping on a bench that doesn't have defensive architecture like armrests or dividers, that there are also benefits for other folks in the community as well. Someone who may not be comfortable sitting in a seat that has dividers, or a group of people who are waiting for a bus who are under an awning that is 6 feet long instead of 4, and more folks can congregate. That some of the potential benefits that can come from creating architecture that is supportive for folks who are unhoused and camping can have benefits for other community members as well. And I think that's some of what I want to get at, and in some of was my intentionality around leaving the language more broad. Now, in terms of where I am coming from in my intentionality, I will be clear. I think Commissioner Bachrach is somewhat correct in terms of where I'm coming from on this, is that if it is necessary to add more clarity to the language to be clear that we are talking about folks who are unhoused and creating those supportive spaces, I'm happy to work with other folks, potentially even someone who is a designer, which I am not, to figure out how to bring that clarity to the language depending on how this vote goes today, and would acknowledge that perhaps some of the folks who might be helpful in that language may not agree with me in terms of the direction that I'm going in. would hope that there would be opportunities to collaborate to ensure that the discussion that we are having is reflected in the language, but that there is that openness to this idea that we are not only creating opportunities and support for the folks who may benefit most by having architecture that is supportive and acknowledges the realities of our city right now, but that there may be additional benefits as well for folks who come from a variety of backgrounds and communities and may appreciate a public-private kind of merging of spaces that is one that is welcoming and creates as few barriers as possible. And I actually have some potential code amendments, depending on how this conversation goes, that could help to clarify more specifically how someone might be able to get points and follow Design Guideline 6, specifically along the lines that Commissioner Spivak was mentioning.
Please, Kasha.
I think that your last statement kind of clarifies a little bit what I was going to try to say with the necessity of our language being a little vague. Sometimes not defining what rest really means can be very helpful because it can allow a designer some flexibility. It can allow a developer flexibility to assign what they believe is relevant. I think even before the sentence prior to where 2 would be added, it says development should consider providing needed open spaces. Maybe we would have to go back and define what's needed, right? I think that sometimes being vague allows you to have the flexibility to decide whether or not, without those further amendments that tell you specifically how to act and how to design, you have this flexibility that says, yes, maybe we're not going to add these dividers, but also maybe we're not going to specifically design to encourage tenting on our property. I think that I don't know, I guess maybe I'm trying to get to why do we need to define rest? And if that's the problem, then we should define it in the language or in the amendments and then allow people to change based on their project. I guess maybe I need clarification on that. I haven't been here for a lot of the conversation, so maybe this has already been decided and maybe you guys have already defined it. But I feel like sometimes the vagueness of the law gives you flexibility, or the vagueness of the code gives you flexibility, and not saying specifically how it should or should not be used gives a developer or designer a chance to move along with the times. Like we said before, we don't know what they meant by rest 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but we know how we want to define it now. And because it's in the code, we now have some place to jump off of, right? We have a place to pivot off of. So without being too specific, sometimes it's okay to say rest and allow it to be defined and have the design commission use it by project, based by project by project.
Mike?
Yeah, I was in the minority last time as well, and actually, it wasn't until there was a very explicit reference to being able to camp and so forth that rest became problematic for me, and which is why I was in the minority. I agree with the verbiage in 1 and 2, and particularly with the strikes. Steph, I think, brought up the issue, and Eli did as well today, with regard to defensive design. I too hate those benches that you can't really feel comfortable on, and I think that's something we definitely want to avoid, and we should be addressing. Obviously, the word rest now is a pretty freighted term. I continue to have some concern about using the term rest unless we do define it, or we're explicit in our communications with the Design Commission that that is not our intent. I could not support if we were staying with the concept of people being able to camp. It's a huge issue. Homelessness, houselessness is a huge issue. We need to deal with it. I can't imagine anyone on this commission feels differently than that. Is this the right tool to address that issue? And in my mind, the way we were going about it was not the correct tool, as well-intentioned as it is.
Steph?
First, this is a great discussion. I would rather not be anywhere else but here, so thank you all. I wonder if hearing that, you know, the word rest is in other parts of the guidelines, if there is, you know, there has been comfort in using that in other part of the guidelines, has there been enough guidance about what that means? And is that something that we can draw from, not having seen it? So I have not done that homework. I've been thinking a lot about, so that's a question. A few thoughts, because I think like all of you, I've been thinking about this a lot the last few weeks, and been thinking a lot about the permeability between public and private realms, and the fact that, for example, we had our first vacated street on Southwest Ankeny, which is a public space that was ceded to some, temporary private use. We've had street seats that are Portland's versions of parklets, and I think that all of that has been to create this conversation between what activated space in both the private and public realms look like. And I think of, as a former executive director of Oregon Walks, thinking a lot about activated space, and I feel personally comfortable with the concept of resting and welcoming, in that so many of our other guidelines related to walkability is inherently about sojourning, a concept that is also used as lingering, and that it be welcoming and inclusive for a lot of different uses.
So perhaps I can answer your first question, as I'll put both my previous design commissioner's hat on as well as design professional. The way I would say we answered it before was exactly as it was phrased originally, which was the definition of rest was to pause, sit, and interact. So to your point about clarification, that's, I think, exactly what's happened here, is there was a desire or an intention maybe to put a little bit more definition to the word previously as it was used, and here we are talking about yet another way to interpret the word, which is healthy. But that's how we've used it in the past, or at least responded to it in the past. But I think that was a great point. To your point about the ambiguity, the fact that these do serve us for many, many years. Society evolves, and houselessness is a big issue right now, but maybe we could, solve that in a shorter period of time than before these get rewritten, and it would mean something completely different at that time. Any other additional comments? Yes? Yeah, I was looking like maybe you wanted to add something, Oriana? No? I'm not trying to force you, just wanted to make sure I give you the opportunity. Yes, Eli.
I generally think of private property owners' responsibility for larger societal problems. I'm a big fan of, when we providing for affordable housing, have something bond, a very broad and shallow tax, so people contribute towards it. I think for downtown property owners should be contributing towards addressing the houseless population. But my ideal way is to have a broad tax over a bunch of property owners and have it be relatively shallow. And this feels like, if it were interpreted as providing a place for someone to sleep, that's a very narrow and deep tax on a particular property owner. So it's not my best public policy idea of how to address the issue we share. So I guess I support the language as drafted up here, but I probably wouldn't go to the additional maybe direction to say that people need to provide a place someone can camp, and that I'm happy leaving that out.
So I think I'll jump in here to address Commissioner Houck's comments about kind of what our role is here, and acknowledging that houselessness is an incredibly broad and important issue that we are facing right now. I think that when we tend to be too narrow in terms of how we approach different issues, we address the issue of houselessness through housing, we address the issue of transportation, specifically through transportation. I mean, just earlier we had folks from the Bureau of Transportation coming and talking to us about land use, because transportation and the land use issues that we tend to deal with in that space do interact deeply. And I think the issues of housing and whether there's housing available interact with the space as well. And that the issues of how folks are using this exterior space, whether to camp or not, is something that is deeply entwined with this conversation, simply because it is a reality in terms of how folks are using land in this city at this time. And perhaps that will be different in the future. I think where I'm coming down now is, I think I've been clear about some of my intentionality in this, but I am comfortable with leaving the language a little bit more vague, as Commissioner Spivak has suggested, and to the point of Commissioner Lawrence Spence, of let's leave it up to interpretation. As much as I would like to see a world in which all buildings can provide supportive space for folks to camp. And I've been spending the past couple weeks keeping an eye towards where folks are camping in the right of way and where folks are camping in spaces that are more sheltered or are on private property. And there is quite a big mix of both. I would like us to include this language, to include that broad word of rest, so that someone who did want to interpret the language in that way to create space where folks could have a safe place to sleep, or have benches that are more comfortable, because it sounds like we all have some shared consensus around the discomfort of benches that have dividers or arms, but get back to that idea of targeted universalism and say, let's leave a word that is broad and that can be interpreted in many ways, that a community center or a faith institution who is building a new building and wanted to see space that could be used for camping as part of that definition, have that availability, but potentially perhaps not be so prescriptive as to require that for every single building in the city and every single design piece, but at least be more permissive and open in our language. I think pause, sit, and interact is one definition of rest, but it is one that, similar to those dividers or seat arms, is a little bit defensive in its nature and encourages us to design in ways that are for much shorter times of interacting with spaces, and to me, being broader in rest gives more opportunity to have different interpretations of how long you would want someone to be welcome in a space.
So Andrea, I'm going to call you out. Did you have something you wanted to add?
And actually, Oriana's comment actually may clarify this, that I think it seems like the majority consensus is that while this proposed language can be more inclusive and achieve some targeted universalism, broader impacts and benefits, the intent behind it is not to require or insinuate that the commission is looking to have private developers, private landowners to create and establish the space for people to stay. I think just in the deliberations, and certainly given the attention that the earlier conversation has generated, I think in the deliberations and in the communication conveyance to the Design Commission, it'd be helpful just to clarify that, if that is indeed the majority view on the commission.
Go ahead, Ben.
So I have a suggestion. So maybe if this is the direction that we're going, I would propose a friendly amendment to replace resting with pause, sit, and interact, which I do agree with Chair Schultz that that was the intent from staff, to really clarify what that rest meant in the previous guidelines, and basically provide that. I'd say further clarify this by maybe adding language to the effect that we do expect to see designs that aren't defensive. So maybe quoting armrests or other measures that are typically used to deter people to rest. So I think that would provide a level of clarity that you would need from a design standpoint. So you look at this and it's clear what the intent is. I think this was a very good, useful conversation to that effect. So
I think what I'm hearing from you, Ben, is starting with a motion to take another vote on the title of the guideline. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay. And then from there, depending on that vote, we would have a discussion regarding adding defensive design, or not encouraging defensive design within the background. Is that correct?
Correct.
Sandra, it looked like you were trying to
That was what I wanted to clarify, because your letter to the Design Commission already gave them testimony on the guideline itself. But it sounded like you were suggesting that you wanted to take another vote on suggested language for the guideline itself. And when I mean the guideline itself, I mean this sentence, right?
The provide opportunities to pause, sit, and interact versus where we last voted was provide opportunities to rest and be welcome.
Correct.
And to be clear, I would agree that we can make the, number 1, 2, and 3 amendments as well.
Let's take them one step at a time, if you don't mind. So is there a second to Ben's motion on a vote regarding that sentence, that line?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. So any further discussion on that item? Are we all clear with what we're discussing? Yes, Eli.
I'm not sure this is exactly for the discussion, but another way of achieving this might be on number 3, where we say after gathering, add and resting. That seems like an opportunity to say, instead of and resting, we say and pausing and interacting and sitting. Like we could leave, one idea would be to provide the specificity in the narrative below in terms of how we define what rest means, rather than revisiting the title of it.
Of course, that's not the motion, Eli.
Well, it's for discussion.
Okay,
And so I
okay,
think,
well,
I think Eli's comment, from what I'm understanding, would be to leave it as we've already reworded it, to rest and be welcome, and clarify rest as pause, sit,
I
and
didn't
interact.
understand.
as
I'm
the-
wondering
as the
if this is a
background.
friendly amendment. You sound like that's the question.
It wouldn't necessarily be a friendly amendment if you're actually going to change the language to pause, sit, and interact to the title, which is.
I guess what I'm wondering is shifting the pause, sit, and interact into the narrative below rather than the name above.
I think in that case, if I'm hearing what you're saying, you would be voting against Ben's motion.
I think I would be, yes.
Yeah.
But I was asking first if that might be a,
Exactly, totally fair. Just
Asking
making
first
sure
if that was
it's
it.
not a friendly amendment, it's just a no vote and then a further. Did you want to add something?
No.
Did you want to get my attention on that?
No, I just
That's
yeah,
fair.
I agree with what you were proposing, Eli, but again, I agree that it would be a no on Ben's proposal, and then we add that later. Yeah.
Okay, so, any other discussion on the motion on the table?
Clarification, so is the motion to go back to the original language?
Yes. So the motion on the table
thank you.
is
Just want
to
that
leave
clarification.
to leave the language as, for Guideline 6, provide opportunities to pause, sit, and interact.
Just a
Yes,
quick
Mike.
comment, yeah. I was interested that Ben was quite happy with number 3, leaving and resting, which I would agree with. We have the word in there. I think that, to me, that's a reasonable approach to this.
It seems to capture the
And
spirit of the
what's
conversation.
really interesting, I'm not going to introduce yet another word, but interestingly, in every forum I've been in, and the Broadway corridor was a case in point, folks who are concerned about underserved communities, communities of color, low-income communities, the word that most often comes up is unwelcoming. That's why when I made my comment last time, I thought the word welcoming actually got at what we're all talking about here. I'm not going to suggest putting that in, but that is the word that I hear most from folks who are concerned about being excluded from our design world and parks.
Okay, thank you. So let's call a roll on that, Julie.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No?
Yes. So that fails, 3 to 5.
Yes.
That fails, 4 to 5. Okay. So we are leaving it at provide opportunities to rest and be welcome. So now the next thing I'd like to have, ideally, well, I guess you've already proposed a motion. Actually, let's make a motion on the language for the background. How about that?
I'll propose a motion
Okay.
to
that'd be
adopt
great.
what's on the sheet in front of us with the Number 1, there's a period after public and the rest is strucken out. Number 2, as written on the sheet, period after safety and the rest struck it out. And for item 3, we would capture the seating, provide seating or points of interest for stopping, viewing, gathering, pausing, and interacting. It's not a glorious phrase, but I'm trying to get into the body what was lost in the definition of above. Because I just love the phrase rest and be welcome. I like it. So
Okay.
that's my
Great.
proposal.
Okay. Any second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just want to be really clear. In our conveyance to the Design Commission, we will not, if this were to pass, be including any language related to camping.
I am not, at this time,
Because
seeing anything proposed that
that's
says
the
that.
deal killer for me.
Fair.
If we're explicitly stating that, then I couldn't support it for the same reason I couldn't last time around.
I don't think there's any motion at this point in time that says camping anywhere. So, Ben, it looks like you.
I have more of a procedural question. So if we vote on this and it's a yes, does that preclude us to add language to,
You can add another motion.
okay, we can add another
Or you can
motion
add a
then.
friendly amendment if you'd like, if you think it's friendly.
Yes, it would be friendly. I think it would be clarifying the idea of not putting, defensive design measures within a design.
Right.
So before you vote on this motion, I'm looking at the words strung together, and that sentence would read, "And development should provide seating or points of interest for stopping, viewing, gathering, pausing, and interacting." And my question to you is, pausing and stopping the same thing?
No.
No? Okay.
I think stopping is different than pausing in the sense that if I stop somewhere, it could be very temporary. If I'm pausing, I guess maybe we should clarify one or the other. I think when we put in pausing initially, that is something longer. At least that's how I interpreted it. I think a stop can be really, really short and very temporary. I think a pause, based on my background of pausing before a meal or to say a prayer or to do something else could be a much longer thing. It could be 5 to 15 to 20 minutes or longer. That's just my interpretation of it. So maybe we should clarify that language and decide whether stop or pause or something longer.
I love that I would have said just the opposite, and yet we would have said the same thing, and it's in our own way. So maybe it's both. And that I would say a stop is longer than a pause. I love the wordplay. It's fun. Yes, please, Ariana.
So I have a friendly amendment. I too feel like pausing and stopping are different amounts of time, and I think tend more towards Chair Schultz in that a pause is a shorter amount of time than a stop. So maybe we should include both words. I'm agnostic to that, although my intentionality is around whatever we decide is the longer. But the friendly amendment I'd like to propose is that after viewing, pausing, and interacting, or however we decide to rework that sentence, to add a sentence that would indicate something along the following lines. This would include the exclusion of architecture that might impede any of the aforementioned activities, or something along the lines to get at what Commissioner Bortolozzo was speaking of being really clear that we mean that this stops the use of defensive architecture for something that would impede pausing or stopping, viewing or gathering in a space.
So I've written down a few things about designs that are not defensive or designs that do not deter rest. And we don't have to be that specific in our language as clarification to Design Commission, is all I'm suggesting. So even if we don't all agree on the language, if you want to provide clarity to your earlier testimony that says that you would like somewhere in this language there to be a sentence about not deterring rest or discouraging defensive design, that's all you have to say. You know, we don't have to wordsmith it here today. A lot of the feedback I'm getting right now from Design Commission is along those lines. Please include a sentence or two about XYZ. So the fact that you're doing that, it seems like there's some agreement. You could just take that up as a motion without exactly providing me the text. So just no pressure to do that.
I appreciate that. We have the humility. We're just a recommending body to the group that's actually writing this code. So I'd rather not wordsmith their code. So I would take as a friendly amendment that we capture in our letter that is an example of this is not providing defensive architecture, and let them figure out the wording of it.
Okay. And do you accept that as a solution to your friendly amendment? Okay, just making sure.
I have a question. I'm not sure which language we're voting on, but when I hear we don't want defensive design, we want to accommodate people who need to rest, is there a distinction between telling a designer no defensive designs, no designs that discourage rest, but you don't have to accommodate houseless people? I mean, is the commission trying to skirt around the more volatile words of saying, where I think, Oriana, you began with, yes, we want you to design to accommodate houseless people. Are we trying to back down from that statement by using code words that will seem to suggest that's what design review commissioners should be looking at and seem to suggest that's what designers of projects need to respond to, but we don't want to, I mean, we're trying to create some nebulous space when we want to inject this ambiguity. It feels to me like that's what we're doing, and I'm going to oppose all this because I think we're not being fully transparent here. But if someone wants to take a shot at explaining the difference between those design words and do you or do you not have to design to accommodate the houseless, that's what people want to know at this point. We've put this issue on the table, and whatever words we use, I think at some point there should be clarity. Yes, you need to design for the homeless. No, you don't need to design for the homeless. You need to do something else. But
Go ahead, Oriana, Eli.
So Commissioner Bachrach, I think you're starting to get into the realm of targeted universalism and why it is important that we are talking now about no longer designing in ways that impede camping, but instead of saying you have to design in ways that support it, we are removing some of that defensive architecture that would make it more difficult, that would make it easier for a private property owner to decide that they would be willing to allow someone to sleep under an awning or on a bench. But rather than be prescriptive about that, as that's absolutely what must happen, we're creating space that both makes it easier for that thing to occur, but then also makes spaces that are easier for someone to move with a wheelchair or an assistive movement device because there aren't rocks on the ground in a space that would impede camping or make it easier for someone to sit on a bench. So I think that vagueness is actually part of the intentionality here, is that it is creating opportunity for one thing, no longer preventing that thing in the way that defensive architecture is intended to do, but then also creating more opportunity for other folks as well to interact in spaces in ways that are less impeded.
Any other, Eli, comment, looks like?
I mean, Pioneer Courthouse Square is a great place for all sorts of activities. I mean, it's our Portland living room, although it doesn't look like a 6-year-old living room. But I think universal design is where we're getting to. There's no language in here saying you need to set up for tents. So I think that I'm not finding that in the language we're proposing right now. And I think, so I guess I think that maybe things have evolved since we last discussed in terms of I think things may have evolved since we last discussed on this issue. And I think that in this language in front of us right now, we're not saying you need to design for tents, housing.
So I would, go ahead, go ahead, and then Steph, and then I will.
I think also in the houseless community, you're still going to find people who are not looking to camp at that moment. They're looking to pause or sit or gather or what have you, or view or what have you. So we are always, in the spirit of universal design, we're always designing for all people. It doesn't mean that because we're creating these stipulations, we're creating them for them to camp at that site. They're still a part of the public, and they're still going to need to be able to stop and rest and be welcome, right? So just because we're not explicitly saying camp, that means that that's not what we're explicitly requiring. We're still trying to accommodate every member of the public. So it's not mutually exclusive.
Okay, so Steph, you had your hand up if you still want to go. And then I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to maybe try to get us to go ahead and take a vote on this.
No, Eli took my thing of Pioneer Courthouse Square in the living room, but I feel fundamentally that welcoming and defensive architecture are at fundamental odds with one another, and I think that needs to be explicitly stated. I think, yes, I'll leave it there, but yeah.
Okay, any additional comments? No? So let's go ahead and call the roll.
I think deliberately injecting ambiguity into a zoning code is always a mistake. So for that and other reasons, I'll be voting no.
No.
Yes.
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 And I'll make one comment that all of the images that go with this section are fantastic places that are welcoming, I think. So I think the images are aligned with my yes vote on this.
Yes, okay, that passes. And I believe wraps up our discussion for Guideline 6.
Thank you for the discussion, Commissioners. So we're moving on to the second agenda item, which is about the design standards. So at this point, we're rolling up our sleeves and getting into spreadsheets. If you can find your spreadsheet, that on the top left is titled DOZA Design Standards. That is what we're going to be working off of today.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Start out. Chair Livingston, I think, came into the room, and obviously staff can respond to this as well. I just want to get out there that as a member of the 3x3 committee, I've been trying to keep abreast of what the Design Commission's opinions are about standards and about the guidelines. And I attended a Design Commission discussion on guideline number 10, which really focuses in on a lot on environmental issues, a lot of the green stuff. And at that meeting, what I heard from, I think, pretty much everybody on the Design Commission is that the commission does not have members who have expertise on a lot of the functionality and the performance of a lot of the green issues that are included. Which obviously leads me to continue my pressing the point that the Design Commission needs to have add somebody who does have that expertise. When I think about our purview being on the standards end of things, I become even more adamant about the need to accentuate, to elevate, either through requirements or additional points, issues like eco-roofs and trees and so on and so forth. And the Design Commission, as I understand it, has not really come to a final conclusion on their preferred interpretation or language of Design Guideline number 10. So I just want to put out there that I'm kind of I feel in a very strange place, because if in fact those environmental issues are going to be downplayed by the Design Commission because of a concern over having the expertise to evaluate performance, then I'm more likely to want to really beef up the standards, although I'm not sure that accomplishes a lot, because if somebody goes through the design guidelines, they're still not, those issues are not going to be addressed at the level I personally feel they ought to be in terms of performance and functionality. So I just wanted to get that out there to explain why I might be pressing harder for more points, making something mandatory as opposed to optional. Just wanted to get that out there.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just quickly respond because I was also there. I didn't hear it quite the way you heard it, Mike. And as a, and we can take this offline and kind of go into depth about it. I got the impression, and we should reach out to Design Commission and make sure we fully understand what their intent was with their conversation, but what they were struggling with is some very particular items that some are already existing in the code, and let's talk about eco-roofs. Not that they don't feel eco-roofs are important, or not that they can't look at a set of documents and understand that it's showing eco-roofs, but that, and we do this sometimes too, but it's something that's actually in the building code, or maybe should be in the building code, or maybe will be in the building code. And so once it gets into the building code, now they're in a situation where it's like it's added in the future that all buildings should have eco-roofs. You kind of get a point, so to say, for something that is mandatory versus discretionary. So I think that's what they're wrestling with, more so than that they disagree that about their role in that. So, like I said, we can take it offline. We don't really have time to get into this, but today.
Well, for me, it's very important to point out the dilemma that I personally am facing in terms of what I'm recommending or not. And I'm not being dismissive of or critical of the Design Commission. I'm simply reporting what I heard, and I'm interpreting to say, look, I feel our role is to talk about the aesthetics of these issues, not about the functionality, which is problematic from my perspective. So,
Okay.
and this what I'm assuming will happen is the 3x3 will have a lot of discussion around this and other issues, and
Absolutely.
and I'm part of that, so I'll definitely be weighing in.
Appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
I think the way we weigh in on that is to work on the standards, get the standards as good as we can think about making the standards that are advancing the objectives that we want them to advance. So we have good examples, and we already heard in the last discussion a few examples of some other aspect of it. And then we'll have something to show the Design Commission about what the Planning Commission is moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to get it out there because it is there.
Yeah. So let me tell you about all the tools we have in front of you. If you recall, that we know we're talking about the design standards today, which are different than the design guidelines, but we do want them to work in parallel. We have organized them in the code by the 3 tenets. So they follow the tenets that are in the purpose statement of design review. In our last discussion, you appointed a few members to work on the standards working group. That group met and rolled up their sleeves and worked on quality and resilience as the first tenet and the standards under that. They got a long way and they finished all of those design standards. So those are in good shape to discuss today, and that's where we're going to start today's conversation, and that's where the spreadsheet starts. Public realm, it continues in the spreadsheet, but the standards working group didn't get a chance to talk about it. So what's reflected in the spreadsheet is what 2 commissioners, Commissioner Schultz and Spivak, gave us in their feedback. And then the standards around context are way behind the curve, and they're in the back of the spreadsheet, and we're not even going to pretend that we're going to get to them today because no one has combed through them. So we have the spreadsheet that each of you should have. We'll be going back and forth between the spreadsheet itself and volume 2, which is the standards itself. We did not repeat the standards in the spreadsheet. So Laura has the standards up on the screen, and she's going to scroll through so you can see what the standard is, and hopefully you can read that, or you can use your own volume 2 to follow along.
And I just want to make sure on process today, we are not taking any formal motions or amendments, is that correct?
That's
So we're
correct.
just doing a discussion.
Right.
Okay. Are you taking a hand poll of any sort on these? Or?
Hand poll will be great so that we can, what we're trying to do is develop our list of amendments so that when the 3x3 meet, we'll know roughly where the Planning Commission is.
Great, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. And the reason we are starting with standards today is I wanted to introduce Shem Harding. He is an architect with Decca Architecture, and he has been testing them, drawing. He has subcontractors working on them, so we won't present all of his work today, but just know he's a wealth of information about how these play out and how an architect would use these. And he knows the building code, which is part of this conversation also. So take a look at your standards spreadsheet. On the far left is the item numbers, and you can refer to the row number of item numbers. The standards themselves also have the QR. We're starting with quality and resilience today. There are 2 comments along the top. The first comment, I'm just going to walk us through. There's a, Commissioner Bortolaso had a recommendation that we talk about removing the prohibition on adjustments to standards, and we talked to staff yesterday. We thought we should put that conversation on hold because it has to do sort of with thresholds and how the standards are used, and we really want to take advantage of Shem being here so we can talk about the standards first. That's okay. Number 2 is a consent item, so we'll skip over that and start with number 3. So I'm going to just be the moving us along person. Phil is going to be the person to explain the standard itself, and this list is a comprehensive list of all the standards. So they're all listed here, even though the standard itself is not written here. And if you have an issue on one of these standards that we're going through that didn't make it into the spreadsheet, because we only heard from, I think, 3 or 4 commissioners, when we get to that item, just please raise your hand and we will stop and talk about that item. Our goal is hopefully to get through quality and resilience first, and then we can move along to all the process amendments next. And you need to leave at 3. So here we go. Line item 3, quality and resilience, standard 1. Phil.
So, and if you have your volume 2, it starts on page 57 as it shows on the list. This was a required standard that for new buildings that contain dwelling units that the walls be separated at setback 10 feet from each other. What got brought up during our standards working group was a suggestion that we remove this standard and just rely on what the building code requires. And we didn't come to a resolution on that, and there was a motion to put this for discussion. From our standpoint, we looked at the idea of having more light and air between the buildings in a way to have, not have windows right next, adjacent from each other and so on.
I think it was Eli, maybe, or Ben that had items on this. Eli had his hand up first, and then Ben. But Eli's passing it to Ben.
Sure.
It's like, I feel like a commentator, sports commentator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think Ben proposed this. I support this, removing this item. Building code does address in some situations, but as we learned at our past meeting, you can game building code by using firewalls to get buildings close to each other. But rereading this now, it says new buildings containing dwelling units on the ground floor must be 10 feet separated from other buildings with dwellings on the ground floor. You could have 2 buildings side by side, all the homes facing the street, and you couldn't put them close. So you could have situations where you have no unit facing another unit, no window facing another unit, and still violate this section of code. So I'm particularly attentive to items that are required, and I could imagine a site layout where you want to allow buildings closer than this, and it would be okay. So I'm supportive of dropping it.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think generally speaking, and it depends on type of construction and a lot of other factors, when you get closer than 20 feet, there's a lot of code things that kick in, as far as fire separation, where you put the windows, where you can't, what type of windows you put in. So I feel like that space is already very well regulated, and I kind of see this as unnecessary and I'd rather focus on the important items.
I have a question. It does specifically state here that contain dwelling units on the ground floor. I don't understand. What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, so maybe I can clarify a little bit where some of these concepts came from. And one example where the standard might do some good is where you have sites that have multiple physical small residential buildings on them. But for purposes of the building code, that's all considered, you know, they're small enough that it's considered a single building. And so we were seeing some very narrow spaces and adjacent dwelling units with windows and doors and entries that were closer together than 10 feet. And so the intent of this was to kind of create a little bit more space there, to, you know, inject a little bit more humanity into that situation. And I agree, there's plenty of areas and plenty of situations where the building code would address this, but in, you know, especially further out where budget is a huge factor in these developments, we see a lot of, you know, 4 to 6 unit floor plans with a single exit stair. They're, you know, developers are working really hard to cut out circulation. So multiple small buildings packed together on a site, and that's really where this was coming from, is trying to encourage people to spread those out a little
So I understand that. Explain the ground floor. So if I had two three-story buildings next to each other, we're only worried about the ground floor? What?
I mean, I think
I'm confused.
that's where we were, you know, unit entries opening onto the ground floor level were an area of particular concern.
So is it more about the entries? And that's, we're trying to solve for 2 entries being so close together in a 5-foot space?
I mean, I think the entries are an area of, certainly area of more concern than just, you know, regular walls that don't have entries or windows in them. But even those spaces are a little bit deadly. But I mean, I certainly think it could be expanded to address the upper floors too, if that's.
I think part of the idea was, you know, upper floors could potentially have bay windows or balconies, and that was not as critical as the ground level, having that.
That's
the
why I'm not
spatial.
following, so explain to me. I mean, maybe I don't mean to belabor this that much. I'm confused about the language, and it seems to me if you're worried about units on the ground level being close together, you would be worried about them at any level being close together. If we're basically saying we don't want units more than 10 feet apart, or we want units more than 10 feet or more apart, whether you're up in the air or down on the ground, you're still staring at each other if you have windows there. Right, I was just trying to make sure I was I wasn't missing something in the intent, that's all. I'm not trying
Well,
to.
and really most of when we were kind of doing our tours and looking at existing situations, most of these developments where this was a problem were all residential developments. You didn't see this kind of situation in mixed-use developments as much.
Yeah, but couldn't you have an all-residential development that's 3 stories of residential?
Yes.
Okay, I'm belaboring something. So right now, I believe there's basically a proposal that we make this not required. Does anybody else have questions or comments on it?
I guess I too am unclear about exactly why it was put in here in the first place, especially if it's already in the fire code. And so just wanting before I vote no and align with the commissioners, I just want to be clear for myself what the intention was truly like. So again, not to belabor the point, but if it's not if it's about it's about egress, or is it about accessing the entry? What is it about that?
I think the intent was to create more humane space between buildings so that you didn't have building alleys 5 feet apart when you're walking around a site. You're seeing these very narrow, dark, cramped spaces to get a little bit more space there.
And so just to be a little bit more specific, this was seen more with townhomes or something like that, or was it, because you said
Apartment
several
buildings, usually apartment
like you
buildings.
said smaller buildings on one site, that would be
Correct.
considered one building.
And by building code,
By
but
building
not
code,
by
but not by us.
actual.
Yeah, you can have
Built-
multiple
Not by design
freestanding structures, but depending on building code parameters, that could all be considered one building under the building code. So these rules about fire separation and opening requirements may not apply.
Well, and what we saw in East Portland, when you have the deep lots that are relatively narrow, is sort of a barrack-like development. So you get say a sixplex, 6 feet behind it another sixplex, 6 feet behind that another sixplex. And I think, Jim, I don't know what the building code requirements are, but I believe the idea was that even if they are separate buildings, under the commercial code, they can be closer than 10 feet.
Correct.
You could do 6-foot separations,
Yeah.
as long as,
I
any
mean, you
use
can do
would-
down to 6, I think, potentially.
Right, 3 feet from the implied property line to each structure.
And there's a lot of complexity when it comes to dealing with the building code, but you're correct that there's a lot of ways to get around the building code parameters and push these things closer together. And I think what Phil is also speaking to is the fact that we were looking at a lot of these developments in Outer East Portland where the right-of-way is limited and the sites are very large, and circulation within the site is kind of serving as the de facto public right-of-way, and trying to make that, you know, thinking about this idea that the public realm maybe extends into these sites a little bit, and should we start thinking about how to make these spaces better too?
And I keep wanting to mention just the alignment with Design Guideline 8, thoughtful site design, really just was on the forefront of our mind when we developed this QR1, and just thinking about how people were going to enter the site and enter their units in a way that felt they were comfortable, and that it was with safety, comfort, and dignity, which is what it's listed in Guideline 8.
So here's where, kind of why I was parsing a little bit. I'm not sure that 10 feet solves the overall space between the buildings if you're trying to actually create a more humane environment. So that's one thing. So if it's really about entries, and we're trying to get better entries into units so that you don't have this series, let's say, of small triplexes or sixplexes kind of marching along in a lot that are, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this? That their entries aren't in that 5-foot space. That's really awkward. And that somehow they're forced to at least the open ends of the buildings. So I guess I'm not inclined to support it as it's written. Like I said, if our intent's really about the space in between, then let's be really intentional about the space in between. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, whether I think it should be greater or not, to be honest with you. But that's one thing going through my head. And then the other one is, how do we address entries in this kind of awkward situation that we might be getting? But that this doesn't quite get at it. Ben, go ahead.
I think the point that Phil raised, I think, is good about East Portland, but I believe we've already addressed that concern with Better Housing by Design that specifically looked at that situation, the barrack-like deep block kind of situation. So there's good alternatives there.
It just add open space. It didn't say that you couldn't do this.
But
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but I think the way it was designed, it's specifically to try to avoid that pattern and offer other, anyway, that's how I interpret it. I think what we're talking about is the difference between 10 and maybe 7 feet. So I'm not sure that there is a big difference in terms of how the spacing between functions. I mean, it's really kind of splitting hair in a way. So, and it's not really clear what the intent is to me, and I think it's a fairly limited subsection of development that goes that close. And again, it's already heavily regulated, so I guess that's the rationale behind it.
I guess what I'm thinking is, just because the language isn't clear, does that mean that we should vote it out? Is there an opportunity for the group to go back and to reword it and to rework this so that it is clear what the intention is? Or are we at the place where there's no more,
Well, I guess my 2 cents would be, I think we could take a hand poll on, we're not supportive of the way it's written, and then another poll on, do we support them trying to explain what they're trying to accomplish better later as well?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a little bit of both in one hand poll. We can give some commentary. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Move on. Does anybody else want to add anything to the discussion? So all in favor of removing the language as written today, or removing the item as written today, raise your hand. Looks like we're pretty much there unanimously. And then all in favor of letting staff try to come back to explain more of what they were trying to accomplish with the guideline in the first place, or the standard in the first place? Yeah.
I hear your point about, if you're really trying to protect people's front entries, I would want to make sure before staff spends time on this, to make sure it's not a solution, what's the expression for this? Is it really a problem? Because my sense on those developments is that you do have plenty of space in front of the front door, the entrance. So if...
Yeah, I would agree.
Make sense? Okay, so let's make sure...
You obviously have seen something. We're not seeing it, so we don't understand what you're trying to accomplish, is really what this is coming to. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So you can come back to us. You can poke at us.
We'll come back, we'll show photos, and we can bring different language.
Perfect.
Okay.
Whew. One down.
One down. Okay, moving on to item 4 on the list, which is QR2.
So this is another, and one thing I wanted to mention too with QR1, with that vote, you could also determine whether you want to make something optional in points versus required.
I think once we understand what you're trying to do, we'll figure that one out. Thank you, though.
Right, but keep that in mind as we move forward, because QR2 is another required provision, and this is sort of a vertical clearance. It's basically requiring that things such as pedestrian walkways above a sidewalk or on-site circulation system or bay windows have at least 9-foot clearance. There were no comments made by any of the PSC members, and there was no discussion. So we can move on if everybody's willing to move on.
Okay, moving on. QR3.
So QR3 was, this is a requirement that kind of expands our pedestrian connection system, which generally requires connections to streets, to also require that new development have a connection to a major public trail. There was some discussion about whether we can require that connection remain unlocked or be open. That can be tough to implement and moderate or maintain, since a lot of times those things become compliant driven and it's based on a complaint. So there was a lot of discussion at the PSC with the standards group. What the idea is to make this an optional standard, and then we would have to determine how many points it is.
Further discussion? Steph?
This has been haunting me since the work group, and connection is so important.
Agreed.
Oriana?
I'll raise that it's not just a connection issue, but an accessibility issue as well that can come up for folks who may have difficulty manipulating a gate. So I am in full support of this.
So as I guess, some food for thought, I'm supportive of it being optional, and here's why. I had a project that we were working on that was right along the Willamette Greenway Trail. The project itself was actually, there's no gates, there's no division between the trail and the building itself. It's all just landscape area that flows from one to the other. But there's no specific on-site connection to the trail. There's streets adjacent to the project that you can leave the project on site and get directly to the trail. The way I'm reading this would say I've got to do it on site. And Parks specifically requested we not connect our project directly to the trail, and that was due to confusion of public-private realm and policing it. And so we didn't. We talked about it, we thought about it. So anyway, that's where we ended up. So I guess making it optional kind of certainly makes it important. It makes a statement about the importance of connecting to trails, but also provides some optionality for how to deal with maybe some situations such as that, especially if this is a standard where you might have Parks Department going, no, don't do it.
Can we just add language that articulates that we don't want a project to restrict access to a trail when it is the only point of accessibility? So, clarify.
Yeah, I don't think a major public trail would ever be the only point of accessibility. It would always be secondary to the public right-of-way anyway, so.
I agree with Commissioner Schultz. I think there's a lot of, every site is different, and there's a lot of different unique situations that you have to address, and I think clarity of a path or a connection is one of them. So it's really site-specific, so having that as an option makes sense.
And just to refresh your memories on what happens between required and optional. If it's required and a development can't meet that standard, it throws them into design review, into the discretionary design review decision-making. If it's optional, then they could use that as a point, to earn their points.
For clarification, even though a trail might not restrict, there'll be other access points, is it such that those access points would not be developed enough for people to see them, or will the development restrict view lines of sight to the trail, or what, I guess, again, the intention behind this? Is it because something has happened that people no longer understand where the trail ends and how to get back to, the rest of the world, or the built environment instead of the natural world? Or is there, what has happened that has caused you to create this in the first place?
This was actually something that we had with discussions with the river team, and they were interested in ensuring that basically we treat a public trail, major public trail, similar to a right-of-way or a sidewalk off a street, and that there basically be a connection that incorporates into the network. Now, the issue about the security is always a different, another issue, because you could have pedestrian connections from the street to apartment buildings and still have a gate to delineate sort of the definition between public-private space, and we don't necessarily have a lot of control over that. And so that's why the discussion with the standards working group kind of went back and forth about whether you could always require it to be publicly accessible. But the base of this was this intent that we sort of treat the public trail as part of our transportation network, just like we would a street.
Eli?
My reason for suggesting this one is I thought if we're going to require this or make it elective, I wanted to make sure that if you create the connection, people can actually use the connection. That was why I brought this up. And I also acknowledge that there's only so much the city can do to make sure people can use the connection, because people are allowed to put up gates, and it's hard to manage ongoing operations through the zoning code. So I can't solve that one, but I would say that whether it's required or optional, I want there to be some expectation that people can actually use this, because I'm not really interested in giving points to somebody to create a nice view through a gate at a public trail. So I don't know if it's possible to regulate that, but my thinking is that if you're going to give points for it or require it, someone should actually have to create a connection people can actually use.
Okay. Any other discussion? Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to take a vote on that one. But anyway, any other discussion on that? I'm not seeing any. So I guess, first of all, is there, since I've got the mic, I'm going to say, is there support for moving it to optional instead of having it be required? All but 2 and 3. I can't see if your hand's up. All but 3. Okay, so that passes to move it to optional points. And then I guess then it would be following up on what you just said, Eli. You're saying if it's going to be an optional point, you can't put a gate on it. Is that what I'm following?
I don't know if there's a way to write this. I mean, that's the challenge. Is that I would say that if we're gonna award someone a point for doing this, it should mean something.
Right.
Well, it means something for probably the people who either live on site or are in the office building that are right next to it. Without a connection, those folks have to leave their site, go off-site, and find a connection 2-3 blocks away.
So
That's what.
it's kind of private connectivity to a public
Right,
system,
it
just like
yeah.
to a public road.
Right, and, it activates the major public trails, which is what we're about, right? If you're sitting there in an office looking in the window at the public trail, but you can't get out of your office space and get out to it, you have to go 2 blocks over to get out to it on a public street. That's what this is about.
Okay. So I think you're okay leaving it
So I'm
then?
supportive of making it optional and not many, maybe 8 point, something like that.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions of number of points, or is that just up to us? 1 point, 2 point?
My 2 cents is until we kind of understand where we're going to end up with the whole number of standards, it's hard to understand the ramification of what 1 point or 2 points means.
Sounds good. So QR4 is the next standard. We don't have any changes to this one, but it's about windows facing a pedestrian walkway. So I'll just pause for 1 second. Moving on to QR5. So now we're switching to a different topic, which is on-site common areas. And QR5 is about on-site outdoor common areas. We don't have any proposed changes from a commissioner. Yes, Commissioner Magnetta.
Yes, so in the spirit of the conversation we had earlier around the rest and be welcome language, I think this is one of the standards that I would recommend we make changes to around the defensive architecture piece. I would recommend that bullet 1 should read, the outdoor area is hard surface, meets the surfacing materials requirements in 33.130.228.b, and includes no stones or boulders as part of the surfacing. The outdoor areas include at least 6 linear feet of seating as opposed to 4, parallel to the ground with no center arms or dividers per 100 square feet of area. I'd also recommend adding a bullet option that notes that the on-site outdoor common area must include no barriers or fencing unless it is a community garden or play area.
So one thing I do want to clarify on this outdoor area could be internal to the site. So it's an outdoor area that potentially isn't visible or accessible from the street, because it's intended to actually provide an outdoor recreation area or vegetable garden or other type of amenity to the people who are living or using the site.
Eli?
I guess a process thought is that I have a hard time responding to things and thinking through on the fly.
Right.
These things on the list are all things people submitted ahead of time, and that's a big one. So I mean, I would suggest that we maybe move forward with other items and flag that to hit when we go back to the standards again.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you can send us what you wrote down, because I did not get it all down.
The rest of us were just pretending to be really smart here. Okay, so QR6, this one is about, what is this one about? Indoor common room. And Phil, can you explain this one to us and what the Commissioner Spivak's amendment request is?
So this is another optional standard, and the idea is to provide an indoor common amenity for, the idea is probably generally for residents with a minimum dimension. And I think what the request was is, since this is interior space and doesn't necessarily affect the design of the building, I think there was a request that it be taken out, yeah.
Further discussion?
Sorry, it was
Questions?
consent, sorry.
I'm not seeing any further discussion, so it was on consent.
It was on consent, I'm sorry.
Is there anybody that, well, there's nobody who wants to discuss it, so I think let's leave it on consent. It's being removed.
QR7, this one's about building walls adjacent to outdoor common areas. Looks like the standard working group looked at this and discussed how much, is 15%. And they agreed to leave it as is, so that's on consent also. Okay, moving on to QR8. That's buildings surrounding outdoor common areas. The standards working group discussed it and agreed to leave it as is also. Oops. All righty. QR9, this one is about street-facing window details. This is on consent from the standards working group. No change, but option for adjustment. Can you explain that to us, Phil?
So I think a lot of the conversation revolved around the size of the trim, and also the idea that what the recess meant in terms of the recess from the building wall versus the other building features. And I think there was some discussion about whether 3 inches is too much. Is there something that's smaller? Once again, is this can be adjustable some way, which it can't as it's currently set up. So I think the idea was, I think the option would be, is there another number that's better than 3 inches?
Here comes Stacy. Yeah. With the magic answer.
Yeah, so I think we asked Stacy, who implements this with BDS and works with our implementing team, to come back with information.
Hi, good afternoon. So I did have a moment to look at some details, just 2, actually.
And you were in the back of the room just now. I'm just kidding.
I read
Stacy.
it earlier. But what we found was that what we typically see is about 3 inches from the upper sash of a fixed or the sash of a casement, excuse me, the upper sash of a hung window or the sash of a casement or a fixed. And that 3 inches would be to the exterior of the trim.
The face of the trim.
Right.
Okay. So I think just a little bit of background. I think for those who weren't in the discussion, that I just kind of challenged Stacy. It is a topic of discussion at Design Commission quite a bit, what kind of the depth of the window is, because that creates shadow and variety on a building facade face. And I just was kind of curious what the average depth of projects that we're seeing there. Is it 3? Is it 2.5? Is it, just wanted to make sure we had the number right, was I think the question. It looks like you had a comment.
Yeah, I see this connected to item number 1, requesting the removal of the prohibition on adjustments to the standards track. I think whether it's 2.5, it's 3, it seems like there's quite a bit of subjectivity, and there's a lot of good examples that don't do either of this. There's a lot of windows that are built different, and fins that kind of go perpendicular to the window, that create shadow in different ways. So it kind of, to me, it illustrates the fact that it might stifle a little bit creativity for too prescriptive. So adding a little bit of flexibility would help the design.
I think a lot of my questions are because I have been absent for a while, and so I just don't, I want to know the significance of this in particular. So whether you have 3 inches or 4, what's going to be the difference, and what have we seen?
So visually, the difference is just more shadow, more articulation on a building. And I do believe there is a construction detail that adds value and cost to a project the deeper you go, because you have to set in the frame and do some more detailing. I can let a designer, maybe the chair,
You're doing great.
speak to those. What was that?
You're doing great. There's a natural depth that's created between building materials of the facade and how the window sits within it, right? And how you frame that and waterproof it. And that's why I was kind of like, and to Ben's point, if there was a way to allow somebody to make a case through an adjustment on the standards, it might help get at this. But the intent, I believe, is articulation of the facade, so that when you're especially out kind of along our corridors, you're not just seeing some really flat commercial buildings in a neighborhood context that's got a lot more articulation on the single-family homes. They've got kind of wide, frames around the windows. And that's where I think the 3 inches came from in the first place, the community design standards. And then it's making sure that instead of reading like a storefront or just a flat plane, that you're getting that little bit of depth around the windows.
And the code currently does have one standard written in. There's an exemption in historic reviews for windows in a basement. You're exempt, you don't have to go through historic review if the window is set back 2 inches, but that's always typically in a concrete foundation. But that is a standard that we currently have that maybe could be something that we draw from and forward on with this project.
The trim standard is something that's already in the community design standards. So the idea was to have a recess standard as an option to always requiring some form of trim, especially when the other building materials don't support that.
Right. Yeah, and I do think the option is a good thing personally, because the 3-inch trim around all the windows kind of creates a certain style that has to be set versus giving an optionality to the depth.
But it's a width.
Yeah. And another option on something like this is if it's determined that this is a necessary component to good design, which is what we thought, we put it as required. The other option would be to make it an optional piece, where if somebody wanted to, actually do that recess, and then they could get points for it, but they wouldn't have to do that. So that kind of adds that flexibility aspect without necessarily going towards the adjustment route. The negative, the flip side of that is then they don't have to do something.
Okay, so any other comments on this one? I guess I'm okay with it as it is personally, and I think leaving it in there as it is an or already, it is an optionality. So you can do the 3-inch trim around a window or do something that has the depth. And I am looking forward more to a discussion on the adjustments piece later, personally. So support of leaving it as is, as written? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
QR9, right?
That's what we
Is
just
that
did.
right?
That was 9, so
Oh, and we have another, it's on
QR9.
consent also. QR9, line item 13, the standards group talked about this and it is on consent, which was just a word phrasing about new street-facing windows need to meet this, not at the bottom sentence. So that's on consent unless anyone has a problem with that. So moving on to QR10. QR10 is about the upper floor windows, not the ground floor windows, and we have no change on that one.
No, I'm not going to go back on what we just talked about on consent, but I want to make a note for fellow commissioners, is that there's another item that Design Commission raised with us about when we only did something on one side, and they're looking for it to be done all the way around. So it seems like this might tie to that, and their concern would be, and so this goes to my concern about making sure that the standards and what Design Commission would be able to approve are in alignment. And if Design Commission couldn't approve this because it wasn't cohesive around the entire building, then I think we should discuss that. So I'm fine leaving it on consent now, but I'm.
We can flag it for the 3x3
Yeah.
also.
I think that'd be good.
And I have in front of me also the design guidelines, and I keep reminding myself that all of these standards are about trying to promote quality. And for those of us who aren't designers, this gives you a look into how do you promote quality? Well, you improve the windows and balconies, and you improve it in these ways. So at least for me as a non-designer, that helps me think, oh, that's what we're getting at here. And we, I think, are on QR11, which is about,
Oriana has a question.
I'm sorry, yeah. Oh, QR10, did I skip that one? Sorry. QR10, about upper floor windows. So we're trying to improve the windows to promote quality design.
I'm curious what the sustainability side of BPS had to say about 30% of the area of the new street-facing facade being upper floor windows from an energy efficiency perspective, just naming that resiliency has many different meanings. Here we've talked about the longevity of a building, but want to raise that issue of resiliency as it relates to climate as well.
Yes, originally we had two standards. We had one that required 25% of the upper story windows as a percentage of the street-facing facade, and then we were giving a bonus points for 35%, and we met with our colleagues on the sustainability side and just sort of talked to them about the two different policies at work here. One, definitely about thinking about climate and building energy and wanting to be efficient with the energy of our building, but also wanting to promote eyes on the street and windows that sort of helped develop a relationship between the private and the public sides. And we agreed that 30% is a good benchmark number because I think, and I'm not the expert here, but I think the 30% is, I think the upper limit, or maybe the ceiling of the energy code. 30% is also a trigger for bird safe. Once you go above 30%, at least in our Central City code, and in our guide for bird safe buildings, that's when you trigger bird safe. So we felt like 30% was a good number to settle on here. So we discussed that with them, and that's where we landed. And we, instead of having one required and one bonus, we just took out the requirement and made it a bonus for 2 points at 30%.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the energy code does let you go above 30%, but it requires a more stringent analysis than staying below it.
So the only thing that went through my mind as you were explaining that, and I agree, 30% is doable to hit your energy code today. So I guess one thing to think about is how easy is it to adjust these should the code actually get you to the point where, I can't have 30% windows for some reason because we can't hit energy code, and I guess this is optional, so maybe that's how our out is.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And that's why we did that. We took out the
I say the only other thing I can think of, is you hit code maximum or something like that, and then it just stays more flexible. But I think it being optional is fine for now.
Okay, moving on to QR 11, which is about street-facing balconies. We don't have any comments about this one, correct? Yes.
Sorry, similar question, and I'm not perfectly familiar with energy code, but does energy code require a thermal break for balconies?
I can't remember if it's actually required.
I think it's highly encouraged, but there are ways to get
Well,
around
encouraged,
that.
and it's hard to achieve without it. Let's put it that way. Because again, there's different ways to go about hitting energy code, and like you could provide more insulation somewhere else to offset that if you didn't have the thermal break, but it's kind of embodied within it.
Okay, I would just raise both looking at the number of points here and then without naming a thermal break, have some concerns just from an energy efficiency and a climate resiliency perspective here that I think I'd more like to name than necessarily suggest moving, but I defer to folks who are actually doing the design work about whether it feels like energy efficiency is sufficiently met without naming that versus kind of, again, thinking about how our energy code changes in the future and promoting design that is more energy efficient and being really clear that if we're putting in balconies and we're giving a lot of points to them, that they should have some energy efficiency elements built in.
So, sorry, Oriana, help me. Are you proposing that we change, so your proposal would be that we change the amount of points, you think?
I think my proposal would be naming the thermal break here, but that's where I would defer to those folks designing, whether it feels like energy code encourages it enough that it's something that you tend to do by default, or whether perhaps as a city, we want to go a little bit beyond what's just highly encouraged and actually name that if you're putting in a balcony, and we're suggesting this number of points because balconies are nice spaces and probably should be given value in design, that we should ensure that they are energy efficient and not necessarily detracting from the efficiency of a unit and leading to someone to have higher energy bills. That gets outside of the land use issue a little bit, but again, like this is a body that does address our climate action plan, and I'm worried that without naming a thermal break here, we might not be getting at some of the goals and some of the other elements that we address in this body.
So you can't get a building permit without hitting energy code. So you're going to have to design for the break, like I said, or design a building that offsets that somehow, some way. So I guess to me, the energy code, this doesn't preclude that from happening. And the importance of giving people outdoor space and encouraging outdoor space, I think is also extremely important. And thus, I tend to be supportive of it just because I know energy code's gonna make us hit that piece anyway.
Okay, I'll trust that assessment then, that it feels like we're getting close enough to that element. Thank you for entertaining this.
Okay, QR 12, this is about sunshades for windows, and the standards group discussed it and discussed reducing the sunshade protection from 3 feet to 2 feet, and they put it on consent. So unless anyone has issues with that, great. QR 13, this is about bird-safe glazing for windows. This is a requirement in Central City alone, and of course, these standards would be applied to outside Central City and the D overlay, so that's why it's here. Consider dropping this item, and I'm sorry, what did the standards working group say about this one?
I think.
See comment to QR 6.
I have written down on mine that because it was optional, we were leaving it in.
Yeah. I'll make one comment that'll cover a bunch of my comments here. This is just one of them, is that I don't support the design review being used as a way to create stretch building codes. And I think there's other ways of accomplishing that. Because it's sort of funny how design overlays map. I'm not sure why one building would have to meet a higher code than another. And I don't want every interest group to be wed to design review and therefore try and cover the whole rest of the city with it. So having said that, I'm only going to really zero in on the ones that are required. And if we're just providing optional points for it, I'm going to say I don't care. But I might not support some of these. So that's why on this one, I proposed it, and I'm just going to withdraw it.
Okay. Any other comments about that? So it stays as optional?
So Commissioner Spivak has brought this up in the past, and I'm curious, what other avenue is available to us when you talk about putting it in the underlying code or whatever?
We've been doing it. We put it in the Central City Code. We put it in the mixed-use zoning code. There's ways that they can show. Some of these can show up in the building code and have over time. So I think that this code is. I understand that this is a place to people can. I always welcome and want to incentivize some level of experimentation. But tying that experimentation to the areas on the map that are labeled with a D doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'm supportive of a lot of these ideas here, but I'd rather, I'm not looking for a more and more expansive, what I think of as scope creep for design review. I think design review should focus on things you actually can see. And there are all these sorts of other things about buildings to support, but I wish design review focused on things you can actually see, the public interacts with. The invisible things, I think, are important, critically important, but I wish we'd handle those in other ways. So for trees, for example, I'm not a fan of having green roofs be part of this process, but street trees, I know that, street trees and buffering at the ground level to interact with public interaction, I'm all in favor of that. So that's sort of an example of an issue that sort of splits me.
Right, because I would favor making this a requirement, frankly, but I may be alone in that regard. And
as I said, as long as this points, then I'm just going to let it slide. If it becomes a requirement, then I'll raise my hand again. So this one is not.
And I took a look at my notes, and what happened was basically because it was an optional and it was a points-based, Eli just sort of dropped his suggestion, and so it essentially became a consent item, but we didn't put that in here.
I'll keep doing that.
So continue moving on. Yeah. QR 14. This one is about windows on upper level units with multiple exterior walls. And the standards group wanted to discuss it today. Phil, can you refresh our memory?
So the main discussion, this was intended to apply to, say, corner units or those that had more than one exterior wall. And I think the discussion came up, well, what if you only had one exterior wall, but you had two windows in that same wall that could operate? Should they also be able to get points? The initial intent was the idea that by having, say, two walls, whether it's a through unit or on a corner, that having two walls that have operable windows would allow for more of a breeze or ventilation than you would just by having a single wall. But I think it got left for discussion about whether we're being too prescriptive about where this applies, and if the commission would be willing to consider any unit or office space that is on a single wall that has two operable windows to get those points.
So, and I think part of my comment is we often do corner units, and you could have a window on each of those facades, and you're not going to get natural ventilation out of it. You could meet the requirement and still not get cross ventilation out of it. You're going to get natural ventilation. I also have written down in my notes that maybe part of our discussion was changing the title to be natural ventilation on upper level units versus windows. As I'm sitting here thinking about it, it seems to me, with the average size of units today being around, and some would even say this is on the large side, 700 square feet, getting one operable window in there meets a lot of our natural ventilation requirements. It meets it by lead. So maybe the standard should be you just have to have one operable window per unit or commercial space. And that encouraging that is a stronger way to go if you're trying to achieve natural ventilation. Any other comments or discussions? Is there support for that?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the rationale about being stronger. If you put one window per wall?
No, one per unit.
One per unit?
So right now it's per wall. So this would be, basically you're requiring, so it's a point, which you're gonna do through lead anyway if you're trying to hit your lead points, but you just put an operable window in each unit or commercial space.
Okay, but so we dropped the idea of the cross or ventilation of
Which only gets you one unit on the corners to get cross ventilation, which is, that's why I say it's stronger, because it's forcing like every single unit to have the ability to open their window.
So instead of
Versus just the
applying-
corner windows,
Okay, got it,
units, which
got it.
makes it more universal too. Any other comments, suggestions? And again, it's an optional point, so a little harder to meet, but okay, maybe in support of changing it to every unit or commercial space and/or commercial space. Looks like all but one, and Jeff has stepped out, so all but two. Okay.
So QR 15, this one's about ground floor windows. The percentage of ground floor window required by the base zone, where are we here? Sorry, no change on this one. So moving on in topics, so we're leaving windows and balconies and moving on to building materials. QR 16 is something that the Standards Working Group discussed and recommended that we put this on consent and change the standard a little bit. In support of what the Design Commission had recommended.
Yeah, so it was removing the per facade on bullet point 2, the last item, it was removing those two words, if I remember right.
Okay.
The one other thing I just want to mention on that was, I think we're going to, I think the Design Commission wanted to also include potentially a third bullet point, that the 20% material not part of that list was limited to one material.
That's correct.
And there was consent on that as
Okay.
well.
And Standards Working Group agreed to that. So moving on to QR 17, which is about exterior finish materials. And no change. Oh, no, change per discussion, sorry.
It was also moving the per facade.
Right.
Similar. Last,
Consistency of wording.
yeah.
Okay. And then QR 18, this is also on consent, and the Standards Working Group wanted to change this to a 2-foot return.
So from a 10-foot wrap around the side to 2 feet.
Wrap around the side. Okay, moving on to table 420-3 is about the exterior finished materials. And why do I have a note here that says skip? Are we skipping this? or
We're
are we-
skipping,
That's right.
so we are, we're skipping over QR 19 because that bumps into something else. We're going to talk a little bit about the actual table of the finished materials, and then we'll go back to QR 19 because the table of the finished materials and the last 3 things we discussed are basically linked.
right.
So table 420-3 was a table that has essentially those approved materials that would have to be met on 80% of the facade. There was some conversations, there were a couple of things that were brought up at the working group. One was this, looking at potentially allowing some other types of metals, I believe that, let's see, I'm trying to see, the metals that don't require coating like zinc and copper and so on.
Can we catch up to you for just a second? So we've skipped item number 23 at the bottom of your spreadsheet. That's the suggestion that this table of approved exterior finished materials not be adopted through the legislative process, instead move after we're done with DOZA. It moves into an administrative rule, and we are proposing that we skip that because we haven't talked to the city attorneys about that yet, and we don't have information for you, so we'll come back to that later. But meanwhile, let's try to make the table as good as we can, and that's where we're picking up on item number 24 about the finished materials.
Oh, and
Now,
my error, I didn't realize we moved QR 19 to be after this.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead with item number 24.
So there was a consent that, there was a couple things that we had to flip the metal gauge numbers that we used. That was something we suggested that there was consent on. And then there was also consent to add a list of unfinished metals that are part of the materials, approved materials list. Then piece that we had more discussion was our current provision for concrete, where we allow concrete to be just part of the ground floor. And there was a question about whether, especially on sidewalls that are real close to property lines, whether some form of concrete can go beyond the ground floor and be in the upper floors. And there's some conversation about using an architectural concrete or I think a board-formed concrete, if I recall the words, but something along the lines that allows, something other than siding or other materials for those walls that are real close to the side property lines.
Just quick clarity, I think I brought that item up. There's a lot of beautiful concrete buildings in this world. It seems unfortunate to not allow them. So, but I think there's a way that they can, within this table, describe what type of concrete would be appropriate versus just kind of rough foundation type concrete. So I promised you some specifications to help with that language and can get that to you.
That's fine. And we can also, if you're okay with leaving that change to the 3x3 to discuss, again, to keep, consistency with the guidelines, we could do that.
Any other discussion or concern on this one? Doesn't look like it.
Now we go to QR, so we're skipping the rest of the table, right?
Well, did we want to talk about, so we are having conversations about the idea of whether the materials table can be an administrative role. Okay.
And we're
so
skipping that.
We'll be back with you on that.
So are we on?
QR
Sorry,
19.
QR 19, which is environmental assessment of building materials. That is in our discuss column. And
I can make my pitch.
So let me give a quick overview. The idea is this is something we talked to our sustainability folks, and they saw it as a way to move the conversation so that applicants actually start going through the process of having a life cycle assessment of their materials, and or also going through and creating environmental product declaration if they're using concrete. Similar to, I think, our provision about the lead for Central City, it's not that they necessarily have to follow through with it, but it's a way to educate an applicant. And I think what came up was, this doesn't necessarily impact the design of the building. And I think Eli had proposed that it be dropped. And the discussion was whether this is scope creep, and whether it's something that's needed. And at the very least, we have to ensure that the life cycle assessment is applying to the exterior materials.
You want to describe?
Yeah, I guess my point is, this is a point you can buy. And I don't think the public gets much benefit from it. You get one developer who's a little bit more educated if they actually read the report. It doesn't seem like much public benefit, and I'm not sure that we should have a criteria here that you can just write a check for. And as you point out, there's no way to get anyone to change their practice based on the results of that LCA. And those LCAs are totally available in the public realm, too. You can just get one from the library, I think. So that was my reason for not supporting it here.
I'm chewing, sorry. I have to say, I'm also in support of dropping it. I find the point in the zoning code also, or that we've put into the code, also disturbing. I mean, just to tell somebody to go start a process that you don't have to have any way to control whether they finish it or not, to me is not accomplishing what we're really trying to get at. And we need to just be lobbying with the state or other means to try to really accomplish the bigger goals that we're looking to accomplish. So I'm also in support of dropping it. Any other comments, discussion? Jeff, go ahead.
I agree.
Mike? Okay. Just real quick, support of dropping? Looks like we're all there. Okay, we can move on.
Okay, QR, before I leave that one, this one's related to the issues that you were bringing up about Guideline 10, in your view, right?
This would be QR 19.
QR 19, sorry, right, is aligned a little bit with what we're expecting the Design Commission to do about designing for resilience and how far we're pushing. Granted, it's only in the design overlay zone, but how far we're pushing private development to do more resilient materials along those lines.
I think you asked me a question.
Yes.
No, I would agree with Eli. I think there are many more important things that ought to get points, which is why I agreed with dropping 19.
Okay. Okay.
That plus the rationale that Eli offered.
All right, so moving on to QR 20. So now we've switched topics again. We're on roofs. And this one, the Standards Working Group wanted to discuss.
And this is one where so this is a required standard, and the idea was in our inner pattern area, which is sort of the closer in, older streetcar neighborhoods, if you're on a civic corridor, if the building's over 35 feet tall, the requirement was that there be essentially a flat roof and that there do not be a pitched roof. The request was to drop the requirement altogether, and there was a question whether this can be more targeted. Is it something that should apply universally to the civic corridors in the inner pattern areas, or is it something that should apply only to specific areas that maybe can be identified? I know Shem had some comments on this, and I don't know if you want to add anything to the background and reasoning behind this.
Well, I think this is partly kind of an extension of Guideline 1. You're looking at, responding to the context of areas of the city and feeling like these civic corridors are more urban places. And in some cases, we were seeing development that did not look urban, that, used sloped roofs, composition shingle roofing, and other forms that were not necessarily in keeping with the civic corridor. So I think that was part of the thinking that went into this. And to kind of build on that, we're not saying you can't do a beautifully designed, amazing sloping roof, just that maybe it has to go through design review. If you're going to do it, you can't use standards to do it.
If I remember correctly, we also discussed perhaps requiring flat roofs. And I think one thing that I circled that's been helpful for me to think about this is just with regards to the inner pattern area. If that helps other commissioners think through it. I was struggling with there might be certain neighborhoods where sloped roofs are appropriate and contextual, but I would agree in the inner pattern areas, it doesn't seem contextual in the corridors. Ben?
So just wanted to clarify my intent here in proposing this. I think the pitched roof is, quite frankly, a more economical and straightforward way to build the roof, especially in our climate. Basically, you shed water away from the walls as quickly as possible. And I think there are ways, just like you say, Shem, to build a handsome-looking pitched roof, even for a taller building. We can get into the design of that if you want, but I'm not going to dwell on this. But it seems to me overall it kind of favors a stylistic approach over another. I understand, generally speaking, the idea of the civic corridors to be more urban, but I don't necessarily see that as a way to preclude for doing different kinds of roof. If anything, it kind of limits the potential variety that you could have within a city, which I think is actually adding value to have different types of buildings working together. I think there's plenty of good examples of that in Europe, in civic corridors all over Europe, 5, 6-story to 8-story buildings that do that all the time. So it seems to me that we're kind of narrowing it down to a very specific stylistic approach. I personally like flat roofs, but it seems like it's a little limiting.
Any other discussion or comment? Mike?
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought much about this one until this moment. I'm thinking about disincenting eco-roofs and disincenting providing space on the top of these buildings for people to have access to more green. I don't think that a pitched roof precludes an eco-roof and certainly not solar. So I'm just sitting here thinking about what the implications are for disincenting eco-roofs and providing usable space. Just a
Any
thought.
other comments or discussion?
Is there a middle ground of making this, you get a point for a flat roof, making it elective versus dropping it entirely?
Also seems kind of like a gimme point in all honesty.
What do you say?
Kind of seems like a gimme point in all honesty.
You're right, that's a good point.
I mean, I think probably makes more sense to just get rid of it.
And force people to go through, oh, yeah.
Okay, so am I hearing a motion to remove QR 20? Delete it? Or not a motion, but a support? I guess everybody raise their hands who are in support of deleting it. All but 2.
Okay. So unfortunately, Shem needs to leave, right? Thank you, Shem.
Thank you.
Next time, we'll continue on. We'll
Appreciate
catch
your
him-
time. Thank you.
Yes. We'll catch him up to where we were, where we keep going. So moving on to QR 20, this one is now.
Well,
just
since we're
the-
dropping QR 20, we don't have to talk about that one. So QR 20 is done.
Okay, good. So we're on line item 28, correct?
Correct, although a lot of these had some similarities in the comments, so let's talk about QR 21 first, but then I think.
But these are on consent, right?
Yeah, 22 through 24 are up for discussion, I think. But QR 21 was just a rooftop equipment standard that we have an exemption for certain rooftop equipment. This is a little less restrictive than the exemption, but it provides some standards to have to meet for new rooftop equipment, because if we don't have something, they basically don't have any standards that they have to meet. So if we're okay with that, I'm going to move on to QR 22, 23, and 24. Those all have to do with providing potential resilient systems to a roof. QR 22, they're all optional. They all have a point-based system. QR 22 and QR 23 are about providing eco-roofs or a solar energy system on the roof. There's a requirement. They're very similar in terms of having a minimum area of the roof that has to have that system. And then QR 24 is a sort of a lesser standard, just to require that 90% of the roof surface have a reflective roof surface that's meeting Energy Star requirements. What the comments were a little bit different on all these. There were some comments about providing more points, specifically for the eco roof and the solar energy system. There was a comment that both of those could potentially be provided on the same roof. And then there was also a question about whether for QR 24, whether reflective roof surface is actually something we want to encourage or not. So I don't know if we want to discuss them all as a group or tackle each one individually, but the discussion kind of went around all three.
Any additional comments or discussion?
Well, I'll kick it off by saying I think eco-roofs should be a requirement, and there should be optional points if they go beyond the first 40%. And I do have a question: is there's nothing that prevents somebody from getting points, whether it's optional or required? Well, optional. If there's both eco-roof and solar, they're not mutually exclusive, in other words.
Right. I mean, if they show on their plans that they actually have a solar array, and then underneath that, they have some sort of planting,
Right.
they should be able to get both.
And then my other comment, I think, is consistent with what Eli said on more than one occasion, and that is, my understanding from the folks I've talked with is it's pretty standard procedure to use that reflective surface if they're not putting in eco-roofs or whatever, and why should we give a point? I just, for the same reason I mentioned earlier, I'd rather give points to something that is more effective.
It's not standard for a sloped roof. So then
Nonetheless.
Well, I'm just saying, so now that we removed now that we're allowing some steeped roof pitches, I would say I would expect to see, I guess personally, I mean, what comes to mind, let's put it this way, is more a shingled solution, in which case you're not going to have it be reflective, in which case, to me, it needs to stay optional. If it was required flat,
Which is why I should have voted against.
I just.
That's the issue I brought up.
Yeah.
What are the implications if you pass that?
And I hadn't thought about it till just on this one, so there we go.
Right. It came to pass.
Okay, any further discussion? I personally would not support required eco roofs, but am certainly supportive of it being optional. Any other comments or questions?
Again, I guess to echo what Oriana was stating earlier, is that we are also a climate efficiency body, and we have a climate action plan, and I think requiring a solar energy system or something that does more with our roofs than just leaving them with this reflective surface, which I know does mitigate some heat island effect, but it's not doing the work that a solar energy system would do. However, now that we have allowed the pitch roofs, again, I don't know how those would work together if we did require the solar energy system.
Brianna, the mic.
So I like where you're going with that, but I actually would not support it, just given that not every roof is suitable for a solar energy system, depending on shading from other roofs, or you may have a very low production system. And solar and pitched roofs are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So as much as I would really like to see solar on every roof in the city, I'm not sure it makes sense to make it a requirement in terms of just the way the systems function. Mike?
And just to let you know, I mean, we do see a lot of solar installations on homes, which often have pitched roofs. They just are usually on the south and west facing sides of those roofs. So a pitched roof would potentially allow for solar. I don't know. I'm not sure if a reflective roof surface if that's available for pitched roofs or not.
Yeah, I think that your latter point was what I was trying to get at. I do know that we often put solar systems on pitched roofs. I was thinking about if we're allowing a pitched roof on buildings that are now more than 35 feet, then we're clearly going to be having them in areas where you'd have that shading and where you'd have all of those other issues that Oriana just mentioned. So I guess that was my concern with what are we doing to get to solve some of or meet the solutions that we've already outlined in our climate action plan. Like what here helps us to meet those goals?
Mike?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm arguing for requiring eco-roofs, not solar necessarily. And the rationale for that is it's not just about stormwater. Eco-roofs provide a number of benefits, certainly beyond reflective paint or whatever. And if it's done properly, I've seen this in Germany and other places in Europe, where you have a situation, especially in these corridors, where there's may or may not be any access to green, that they've produced really very functional, the equivalent of a park for folks who live in that building and potentially for other folks. So eco-roofs, and pollinator habitat, et cetera, et cetera. So there are multiple benefits associated with eco-roofs that I think warrant, and one of the rationales for their being required in the central city. So that's my reasoning behind wanting to see it required.
So here Mike and I go again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This will be a very familiar conversation we'll have here. Oh, in addition to which.
Oh, let me talk. Let me say something,
In
Mike.
addition to which, The issue of long-term maintenance and costs, people say this is too expensive to put an eco roof on, but we know that eco roofs extend the life of a roof dramatically.
Oh,
requiring
I'm
less
so glad you
maintenance.
brought that up, because one of the buildings that BES loves to point out, and that you keep pointing out, and has been pointed out by numerous experts that have come in front of this body, has been sitting with its eco roof torn up for months. I stare at it every day.
Oh.
It is complicated to do, it's expensive to do, and they often fail. So to be requiring this on buildings in the corridors that are much smaller buildings that are already burdened with very expensive other items that they need to meet, to now have the eco roofs be required, I cannot support. On wood frame buildings, I've been saying this from the get-go, you're asking for a situation where when the eco roof fails, the potential of a bunch of moldy, mildewy, unhealthy buildings throughout different places in our city, and I cannot get behind that. If somebody wants to volunteer it, if somebody wants to do it, somebody wants to take on the management, somebody wants to own doing it correctly, absolutely, I'd support it all day long. But requiring it, I cannot go there.
Well, and I have an option of up in the points, the optional points.
I don't know that I have an issue with that.
So can we go ahead and do a show of hands for QR 22, which is eco roofs, and discuss and do a show of hands for the optional versus required? Would that be good?
Yep, absolutely.
So we have, so staff proposed it as optional. I guess the move here would be to make it required. Who supports making it required? One. It fails. Okay.
Record show. Jeff, I thought you were gonna go with me for a minute.
So let's go to your next suggestion.
I am
on the
glad you raised your
spreadsheet
hand,
was,
because I was like,
okay, it's optional. We're keeping it as optional. What about increasing the number of points? Staff suggested 2 points. Should we go higher than that?
I am all for incentivizing it and putting this on the list of making sure that, for what this is worth, Mike, when we understand again where the points kind of lay out, to make sure that it's more incentivized than other things. But we could say 3 right now, and only to find out that it should be 5 or 6 down the road. I mean, I kind of feel like, I don't know what we're doing with the points right now. But I'm happy personally saying we should reconsider increasing the number of points. And I would say for both it and solar personally.
Okay, so we'll look at the number of points when we figure everything else out. You also had a new suggestion here of that the standard is that 40% of the roof be covered with eco roofs and you earn number of points. Your new suggestion is, how about if you do more than 40% and another 20% of the roof is covered, do you get to continue earning points?
Right, that was the other option.
What do folks think about that idea?
I'm sorry. I think it just keeps going back to Kat's point about how many points we're going to end up with and where it's going to land and how we're going to continue to assign points. I think,
Yes.
I think it, yeah, I can't vote on that. I would have to abstain.
Okay,
Yeah.
but this is changing the standard itself, increasing the standard from 40 to 60% is,
Or adding a new standard. I thought that was I thought it was X number of
Going
points
beyond the
for 40.
40%.
But then if you did above and beyond,
Right.
sort of creating a new benchmark, then you would get even more points. But I'm hearing what you're saying, like we need to recalibrate. So we can put that as an option on the table. And we.
I'd be supportive of carrying it as an option on the table and understanding what the points would look like when we
And
dive
keep in mind the way we've got our point system based on this, because I think we're going to have possibly a segment of our work session just about points. But if you're talking about a smaller infill site on a corridor in the 5 to 10,000 square foot range, you're talking about they're going to have to get somewhere between 5 and 10 points. And so, you know, if an eco roof is worth 4 on a 5,000 square foot site, then they'll just have to do one other thing probably. And so that's the one thing to kind of keep in mind about increasing the points is it's not until you get to a larger site that you start having to have up to 20 points. So, you know, in the interest of trying to get as many features as possible, that was our rationale for that, of keeping things at 1, 2, or 3 points generally.
Got it.
okay, so I think that resolves all the suggestions about eco roofs. QR 23 is about solar energy systems, and the suggestions here.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Is this sort of issue what we're assuming would be resolved through the 3x3, or is the 3x3 to take another cut at everything and then it comes back to us again?
What sort of issue, the points issue?
Well, that, and
I think the whole points issue is coming back to this body.
Yeah.
Or has to come to this body, personally. I mean, not that we might not discuss it at the 3x3 as well.
okay, I just wanted to know what, back and forth, it sounds like
Yeah.
iterative.
I think it has to be.
All right?
And then I just wanted to, maybe I missed the opportunity for this, but I feel like, are we missing an opportunity here to make a statement, a climate statement with something, with another option that that would be feasible for more developments, whether they are large or small? Is there something else that we are missing, that there's precedence in another city or in another country that we could be doing to maximize the climate potential, to mitigate some of our the things that we are trying to mitigate in our climate action plan? Are we missing something? Like, what are we not paying attention to? Like, I feel like these solutions are things that we have seen for a long time, and maybe there are some new developments that we aren't paying attention to that we could add to this and not just turn the page.
Well,
Yeah, I have a list of things that we talked about with the sustainability side. Some of it was in here that was that just failed to continue, like the LCAs, the life cycle assessment, and environmental product declaration. So those are some things, and there were subject matters that were outside of the private property, like encouraging EV or doing things on the public right of way. But this is what we came to you with, and I can provide that list of things that we thought of, but certainly if there are other subject matters that you think need to go on this list, and you don't have to answer that today, because this is going to be a continuing conversation, and we're open to it.
I just had 3 pop into my head. All electric. So points for being an all-electric building. Points for passive house. Points for solar hot water.
Net zero?
And we also wanted to be mindful, and we're curious about where this body would stand on the things that are visible and things that are, because that's also been a point of tension. I'm just putting that out there. This is not between what we've discussed with the Design Commission and what you're discussing here. So just be aware of that. And I, like with what you had heard on Design Guideline 10, and just the getting worried about how much into the building is this the right tool to do that? And I think that's some of the questions that you raised. So just, with all of these things that we're adding, we just need to make sure that we're in alignment with Guideline 10.
Yep. Yes, Oriana?
So I think to Eli, to Commissioner Spivak's point earlier, as someone who works in environmental justice and climate justice work, I'm not sure this is the most appropriate place to address some of these issues. I think there are other processes going on in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability right now to address building issues and meeting our climate action plan goals and our 100% renewables goals. I think if we're only applying those goals to the design overlay, we are creating an equity issue in terms of who benefits and who's burdened, especially with the electrification piece. If only buildings in the design overlay are electrified, that means that the natural gas prices for buildings that are not in that space potentially go up because you have less in the system, and there are some equity elements that come up that I think are just beyond the conversation we're having right now. So I like where we're going with this. It makes me really excited because this is like what I think about all day. But I'd caution us to use this as a fix for things that there may be better processes to address, and also thinking about like some of the state building code and energy code issues that we may want to advocate around as well.
Good point. I agree with that too. Good conundrum.
I think, yeah, to your point, I think that's a great point. I think it also wraps back to what we were originally discussing when we opened the conversation, whether this is the best body to talk about some of those issues that we were first grappling with. But again, I would love to see if there's something else we could do with roofs, specifically to my initial point, that we are missing. So if there's something else, I can do research, you can give me that list, and then we can talk it through. I just wanted to make sure the opportunity was not gone.
I think it's definitely worth the conversation, and I'm kind of trying to figure out how we should spend the remainder of our 45 minutes. We haven't quite finished our spreadsheet, right? Or have we? We have QR 23 about solar energy systems, and then QR 24 about reflective roof surfaces, and some suggestions about changing the points, which we can deal with later.
I think we've discussed it all. I think what we want to decide is on QR 24, if you want to have a vote about deleting that standard or not.
Yes.
So I actually have a comment on QR 23. I didn't notice this earlier, so sorry if this is coming a little bit from left field. But I don't think it makes sense to create points around solar energy systems with the percentage of the roof that is covered or the space of the roof. That's not really how we tend to talk about solar in terms of the actual benefits it offers the building. I would recommend addressing like the kilowatt size of the system itself, like actually address the amount of energy it's generating. Or think about the energy savings or the energy that's being offset for the building. I think if we're trying to get more at our climate action plan goals, that gets more to the heart of what these solar energy systems would be doing for a climate action plan, rather than just the percentage of a roof that's covered. I think that also creates some imbalances between the size of a building and then that actual like solar potential for a building. A building may have good potential and be able to be covered with 40%, but I would want to see a building that can't cover 40% of its roof with solar, which is actually probably a good number of buildings, especially smaller buildings that would have shading issues, not be penalized and not be able to get those points for still potentially doing some offsets. And then similarly, if it's a building that is very efficient, you may need less solar to offset that building, or this may be an offline conversation to have, but I think I would want this to be written more in terms of the way solar systems actually function than to just be the percentage of the area on the roof.
How would you do that?
Go ahead.
I think it's a good intent, but I think we need to keep in mind that, the code that we're writing now will stay in place for quite a while, so the efficiency of solar panels has been increasing pretty rapidly. So etching in stone as a number of kilowatts versus other ways to do it, maybe to that intent there is a certain exposure, and I think it's 75% where it's really becoming cost effective, where a roof that has a solar exposure at or above 75% is really viable. Maybe that's one possible way to look at it. But I'd be just like, this is tied to the same issue of the conversation about the materials. The code stays and the materials evolve. Technology changes. So I think I'd rather tie it to something that that can evolve over time.
Eli?
I guess as someone who's not in favor of any of these being on the list, I agree that the suggestion should be better quantified, because it actually never says PV on here. It could be solar water. It's a solar energy system. I think it could be clotheslines up there. I mean, there's a lot of solar energy systems separate from photovoltaics. So I guess I'm thinking that maybe a little bit work from staff to clarify what that means.
I appreciate the point you just raised about that kind of longevity over time. With that in mind, I'd recommend something that's more tied to building energy usage and being offset. And addressing that, because that's something that, like, as buildings get more efficient, you need potentially less solar panels to offset the usage in a build, and like that has more longevity in terms of the way that language could be written, and then is also easily quantified in the process. That potentially adds some burden in design to actually have to start thinking about what the energy usages of a building, and I defer to the folks on this commission who have more experience there, but I think that gets more at the heart of like what a solar panel is doing from a climate action plan perspective, and then you're not penalizing someone for not having a roof big enough to meet a certain kilowatt threshold, and you're also not penalizing someone for not having good solar potential, or potentially the way this is written, you also potentially reward someone for just putting 40% of the roof covered with solar panels, and then most of those solar panels are not producing sufficiently. So I think if you're focused on building energy usage, then that can get to the heart of the functionality of the system, and then the amount of energy that's actually being generated.
Oriana, I like where you're going. Where my head is going is the BDS staff person who's got to figure out how to see if the math works. And I don't know enough about it, so I guess it's just something to make sure maybe we circle back and make sure that it's something that's easily done at this stage in the process, that they feel like they can, and just keep working at trying to get what that right balance or mix is.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that hard to quantify or estimate that. And that's, I think, the offline conversation I'm happy to have with BDS or BPS staff, and maybe bring in the sustainability side, like maybe bring in Vin Mason to figure out how do we write this in a way that actually gets at something that can function over time, and then also get to the heart of,
I guess
offsetting
the
generation.
one part that I'm going to bring back, the 40% of a roof is something you can see on a roof plan. You can measure it out at the building permit stage. I'm not sure with determining energy usage or offsets, at what stage, similar to LEED, you don't necessarily know your success until you've built the building and it's operational. I don't know if this would be a similar issue with, you don't necessarily know the success of the solar until the building's up, or you've got mechanical systems figured out completely and all that. And some of that doesn't necessarily get figured out at the building permit stage. It's actually an ongoing thing. So I'm kind of looking at folks who are involved in the building industry more, and architects, if they have a sense on that. But that's my one hesitation, and we could circle back with BDS staff on this. But
Well, at building permit, we have to know our energy systems at that point. So that's, for standards, it works. It doesn't really work as well on the design guideline side. The maybe trickier thing is the level of sophistication of the groups that may be bringing the standards projects through. And so, for instance, our projects wouldn't necessarily have an engineer on board to be helping us run those and understanding those metrics. And so it's, you've got contractors on board, and not to say they're not sophisticated, but the process of getting through BDS is a different animal. I want to make sure everybody hears this correctly. They know how to do great designs and buildings and put mechanical and electrical systems in. But there's a little bit of that. But I think we can figure something out, I guess, if we just kind of work at it together. Yes, Eli?
As a small builder, I think that the subcontractors who install these systems, they have to be able to do the math and figure out the kilowatt hour or the solar energy benefit of the system, because they have to be able to qualify for the tax credits to help pay for them in the first place. So even if the developer is not sophisticated, their subconsultant who's doing the solar system will be sufficiently. I don't think it's an obstacle about the sophistication. I think that they can do it even on small projects.
The only other caveat I would say is just to be careful not to make it so complicated that nobody decides to go after the point. So, but I think I think we can get there, and I think there's a way to have a win-win there.
Okay, great. So that was QR 23 on solar energy systems, right? And the last one is QR 24 on reflective roof surface. And there is Commissioner Hauck, you were suggesting deleting the standard.
Ready to vote.
We're ready to vote on this one?
On
QR
Dropping it.
24, the last one, reflective roof surface.
I guess why would we drop this again? I mean, I understand. So, Mike, you want to explain to us again?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, the points are going to become a big issue, and I'd rather see points going to trees and eco-roofs and other factors than something that I am told is a pretty standard operating procedure. Why give a point for it, something that's being utilized already?
I think that we should keep it. For the sake of being able, the language that talks about that 90% of the roof is not covered by rooftop equipment, vents, and things of that nature, regardless of the solar reflectance, I think that it's important to keep it in. Because again, we're talking about design and how it feels from the street and being able to look at the building and have a high quality. The fact that it prevents people from builders from putting all of this equipment and having it visible from the streetscape, I think that's a reason to keep it.
I think what this is saying, though, is actually we're allowing for all the rooftop equipment, vents, skylights, and stairwells to be placed in the roof, and then whatever's left, the flat part of the roof that's left that's not encumbered by mechanical equipment and other things, 90% of that has to have the reflective roof surface. So this is not a limitation on rooftop features. It's just that areas that don't have those would have to have this reflective surface.
And what if it was roof ballast?
What?
Roof ballast?
Roof ballast is rocks.
Does that meet our reflective surface?
Well, I guess I'm asking you. I don't think it does. And it's a type of roof. I mean, it's just unless either that or you could exclude ballast. Or you're saying you're not going to ever allow ballasted roofs again.
But this is optional,
this is to
right?
get a point.
Again,
I guess that's
so
true.
It's
I
a little
keep
bit, I
forgetting
think
that.
if somebody is using reflective roof surface, we're rewarding them for that.
So can you just clarify what you stated, because maybe we have a different interpretation of the language, but it says at least 90% of the roof is not covered by that equipment. So, but then you stated that
It's saying at least 90% of the roof surface that is not covered by all these things has to have reflective roof surface, yeah.
I see.
So as far as the point thing, I'd be completely personally open to having the discussion when we kind of see how the points land and go, yeah, you know, maybe I really do think it, like, this is, like, yeah, if only 4 points are needed and this is detracting from trying to go after some really important things, then I may agree with Mike.
I agree. I'd like to earmark this for potential discussion, but as an optional point, I think, you know, a reflective roof surface, I mean, I would consider that akin to asphalt on a parking lot. I mean, they all contribute to urban heat island, so I think the intent is good. I'm not necessarily quite ready to drop it.
Well, we can keep it on the chopping block. We won't delete it altogether, but we'll gray it out maybe when we get to the
Do we know how many buildings
Okay, if it comes
don't
down to
have
white
a
roofs
reflective
versus
roof?
trees, I can tell you where I'm going.
I know.
Totally get it.
And this is only 1 point, and the idea of the points is if it's higher value and higher cost, you are rewarded more. This is obviously not that hard to do, but we still want to encourage it, 1 point. So we can keep it on the table or keep it on the chopping block, I guess. And
I would like to know, do we have an understanding of what the impact of this is? If we're saying that it's 90% of the roof that is not already covered, like what percentage of the total area of the roof that's not covered by all of this equipment is even left that makes this impactful?
Depends on the size of the roof and,
So I think the diagram
How
would
much
be,
But I'm
sorry,
saying
this
how
is a
much
small
in
one.
I want to know in the large scale, like, so I get that, but I'm saying large scale, like how impactful is this in the first place? Like what?
So we'll look into that.
Yeah.
And come back with our bigger discussion on this.
Yeah, I think what would also be interesting is of X percentage of projects that have come through on the building permit side, how many aren't reflective,
Yeah.
Exactly.
that are flat? And if it's 2% to the big picture and to the big picture,
Exactly.
then why are we incentivizing something everybody's already doing?
So we'll come back for this.
All right.
And that was the last quality and resilience standard. So hooray for getting through one tenant. We have 30 minutes left in our conversation today, and the energy is feeling a little, it's a lot to go through. And so we were whispering to each other, and we're suggesting we don't move along to the next spreadsheet. about process, because that takes a whole other mindset and whole other thinking. And there's a couple of things we heard today that are bigger philosophical discussions that I think we should wrap up, since your head is in the space of what are we doing with these standards. And those two bigger issues was, and correct me if we don't want to do this today, this is a suggestion of how we spend our last 30 minutes. Issue number one is, what is the philosophy around design review? In the purpose statement for quality and resilience, we have promotes quality and long-term resilience in the face of changing demographics, climate, and economy. And as you saw, and you were wrestling with these standards, I think we might have different philosophies on the commission, and I'd love to hone that in. And
Can you, where is this
where are we?
language?
well,
Sorry.
it's all over the place.
Are we in the guidelines
Page 13
of
Of volume
of
2?
Volume 2.
Okay, thank you.
page 13?
Right, but
Speaking of
basically,
getting our head in the right
everything that we
space.
were talking about right now was trying to create standards that are promoting quality and long-term resilience in the face of changing demographics, climate, and economy. It's that third bullet. That was the tenet that's being carried out by the standards that you were all just discussing. But the philosophy differences I heard on the commission was that the D should only be, there's three options, I think. The D is about what's visible in the exterior. It's not about the functionality. The second philosophy option I heard, which is where staff was going, is that we should use the D to be experimental. And let's experiment with the points. And maybe it's not even stuff that we see, but we should be giving points for these good public benefit things that we want to see. And those public benefit things could be about climate action, it could be about social action, et cetera. So that's the second philosophical viewpoint. The third is using the D overlay to advance our climate action goals. And I see the commission a little bit vacillating and not really, and we had the discussion on several of the standards. And I'm wondering if you all could clarify to us where you think we should be going with this overlay. And I think Laura in the past has drawn a circle, a pie of the D being about exterior aesthetics, but we're really opening the percentage of other goals that we're trying to pull into this overlay and advance in the built environment. And we opened it a little bit. Do we want to open it further?
I see some commissioners wanting to talk to you.
Excellent.
I have to leave a little early, so I'll go first very briefly. if I
Go
may.
for it.
I fall on the more narrow side, if I can agree with that. We should try as much as possible to stick to what does the building look like. Be very careful when we wander into more desirable public policies that don't connect to what a building looks like. And if we do, and I know everyone's got their own particular policy they think is important enough that they want to take advantage of design review.
I'm not on, I hope everyone can hear me. So I would just throw out one more. My particular policy that I think is most important is affordable housing. So I want to see points for developers who will contribute some amount of money to something that helps produce affordable housing. I don't like to see that in design review. I think it's a mistake. But if we're going to start weighing what non-visible things should get points in design review, then I would put some type of an affordable housing bonus in there.
Very much in favor of a broader view, and if I have suggested on a couple of occasions dropping something, it was more over concern about whether some other greening issues might be more important and would be missed in the process. So I think I think functionality is what we should be looking at, as well as excellence in design. And for example, eco-roofs, there has been research done that shows there's an attenuation of urban heat island through if you have enough eco-roofs out there, in addition to the stormwater and other functions. So just because you don't happen to see it on the building, I don't think is a reason to exclude it. It's not all about what a building looks like. That's obviously hugely important, but functionality is as well. Not surprisingly, Jeff and I are opposite ends of the spectrum on that one.
Eli?
And I'm with Jeff on this in terms of hoping for a narrow scope. I think that the public realm is the key element, and if I had my druthers, the design overlay would be sort of channeled in the Main Street direction. It's like, this is what we want our Main Streets to be awesome. They get more attention to design in the public realm, and that those two different overlays end up merging in my mind. I also acknowledge that I lost that battle a year ago with DOZA. There are 3 precedents, so I'm not expecting to just elevate that one above the others. So that's where I've taken the stance of saying it's okay to do a little experimentation, a little reach code stuff with the elective ideas that you get points for. But I think that in terms of required items, I think we should be really kind of pretty narrow on it. And I guess I'll say that I understand that I get Kat's shared a way of aligning the 2 design guidelines, and I recognize that what I've just said makes it a little hard to align them sometimes, because the design guidelines are not our purview, that's the design commission, and if they have items in there that we might not articulate as much in the point system, that creates some discord between the 2 elements. So I'll wait to see what the 3x3 group comes up with to try and address that.
And the first step in having that discussion is for all of you, for us to know where the commission is landing on this issue, on this spectrum.
I stand closer to the narrow path, but with a caveat. So I like it to be about what's really visible, especially from the public realm standpoint, with I think the direction of context, public realm, and quality, and really focus on that. I think that's a great approach, and I truly believe that's the way to go. But I think there is an opportunity to be experimental and advance climate action goals, but I would see that as kind of something that is not required, but it's something that we can work and incentivize through optional points that you can get. So focus really on the bulk of what design review is and what designers are looking for when they're trying to figure out how to design a building, but then incentivize the other 2.
Don't feel like you have to, just.
I guess it goes back to defining the public realm, and I think in that you have to think about something very qualitative, which is your 5 senses, right? The way that something looks aesthetically is just engaging one of your senses. It's just sight. It's not about touch and feel and all of these other elements that are part of the public realm. We talk about thinking about the public realm that encourages social interaction and fosters inclusivity in people's daily lives. And I think that means that we have to think about things that are not just aesthetic. We have to think about things that will contribute to the longevity of our city, which are things like asking for bringing in the climate action plan, right? And the longevity of the health and wellness of everyone in the public realm, right? Houseless or, design professional or what have you, right? So I go to a more broader view of it because aesthetic is just one proponent or one tenet of the public realm. We have to be inclusive of everything else that is a part of our public life. So,
Anybody else want to add anything? No? You said it well, what I was feeling. To me, it's about how our buildings interact with the public. So when we talk about spaces inside, not so much. But when we talk about the exterior, by the way, the climate is something that affects all of us as the public. So that's why, to me, that as a tenant makes sense. Our buildings have a big effect on it. They're one of the biggest effectors of that's happening in the world. So encouraging us to strive and do better with how our buildings respond to the environmental changes is important, and and the interaction with people on the ground and how people interact with the building and the spaces created. I think I struggle a little bit with private on-the-ground spaces, but again, as a way to encourage those spaces to be well done as optional points, I can get comfortable with that. So when I'm thinking about, encouraging playgrounds within a site, I think that's a great thing to have us encourage but to require maybe not so much, right? May not. If I'm designing senior housing, perhaps it shouldn't be a playground, but should be a different type of adult activity. You know what I mean? That type of thing. So I think we have to be careful there about what that means. But again, I think it's about the private public, right? It's about how those individuals interact with each other. So it's still kind of quasi-public, which is why I can kind of get my head around it. Does that make any sense? You were much more eloquent. Any other comments? Does that help at all, Sandra? I mean, so what was interesting to me, to be honest.
The spectrum, you're all.
But I don't see it quite.
I guess I'm encouraged that it seems like the commission is supportive with the direction staff went, which was to use the optional points as a vehicle for advancing newer things, climate action, et cetera.
And there's more commissioners than not that are supportive of that.
And supportive of that, as opposed to taking those standards and making them a required for everything, because these are actually, there's new certification systems coming out. It's a little bit of a newer practice, and we can meet again with our sustainability side of the Bureau to see what other, along the lines of Commissioner Lawrence Spence was saying, like, what else is missing from this list? And you rattled off a few things, the all-electric and passive house and solar house. Like, do we go down that path and bring forth a more comprehensive list so that we all can envision it landing in the optional standards? And I think that's what I'm hearing that we should do, but not in the required column.
Okay, so I'll be okay if it goes in the optional standards, but I would really like for those items to come to the commission in some other format other than DOZA. Like fully 100% electrifying buildings, things we heard about from our briefing from Michelle Krim. So I would love to see some of those items come to us in some other vehicle.
One of the things that we did when we were reviewing this was this idea that incentivize certain things that we may want to see in the future, that potentially we could use the D overlay as a possible testing ground to see if it can be successful. And if it's something where nobody takes advantage of that optional standard, then is it not worded the correct way? Is there some other way to approach it? I think there was a sense a little bit with this of kind of taking that experimental kind of incentive approach to those. And even though the D overlay does not apply to many, a large segment of the landmass, that would be an area that we could test the success, and then maybe we could present that as a larger scale code amendment or something that applies citywide.
Oriana?
Commissioner? Yeah.
So I would echo what Commissioner Spivak said. I think, again, as someone who works in the space of climate and environmental justice, I appreciate this enthusiasm here, but have some discomfort about design being as the space where we are specifically addressing those issues when there are other processes moving. And this is where I get into conflict of interest territory a little bit, because I'm working on some of those processes. But I think there are opportunities for those things to come before this commission and come before council in ways that are maybe more holistic and more holistic of the entire city. I get really uncomfortable when I hear about the design overlay as like a testing bed, especially for climate and environmental justice things, which should be begun in communities who are at the front lines of climate change, which are Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, communities with lower incomes. And when we look at where the design overlay is applied right now, that's largely not those communities. And I don't support applying the design overlay to those communities, but rather if we're going to pilot, we should pilot in communities that are hit first and worst by by climate change. And I think there may be options to put in passive house or net zero and apply some points here for some of those internal aspects of the building. But that to me is such a bigger conversation because there are so many things we need to do around buildings from a climate perspective that I also don't want to be haphazard and just throw a few things into the conversation. That's either something that needs to come back before this commission, either through a different process or through a much bigger conversation with the sustainability side about what we move in design that relates to sustainability and our goals around the climate action plan and 100% renewables.
That's really helpful to hear all of your perspectives on that, right? Yes.
To all that, one other thing that's going through my head, so kind of a little bit echoing that, but in a different frame of, I've seen the community design standards that we have now stay on the books for so long and not get changed and come out of date. And I can only hope that we're not talking about some of these climate issue matters that we're talking about right now in the pretty near future, because it's been resolved through bigger mechanisms. And so I think as a part of it, I'd like to hear a discussion about how often if we're going to have items like this in here, how often do we test getting them cycled out? How do we change things? How do we figure out what's not working? Whether it's those or other items that we thought maybe wouldn't be an incentive but aren't. And they're not just sitting there. So that has me, I guess, an item for us to discuss at another point in time. I had another thought, and I can't remember it now, so it'll come up later.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes left, and we have two options.
We don't have to use all the time.
We can adjourn, which I feel like only next steps, okay. And then maybe next time we'll talk about the adjustments to standards. Because right now, the way the standards work is you don't meet it, you go to design review. And Ben was suggesting that perhaps people can request an adjustment review instead to those standards. But let's put that off. It's been a long afternoon. And we will talk about next steps, right? Sorry. Next steps.
Oh, I thought of my one last point.
I'm going to distribute
It's
this
really
later.
quick. That whole list of things that we rattled off as other items, or that I rattled off that came to the top of my head, such as passive house. I'm hesitant for you guys to spend a lot of time personally, and I don't know how the other commissioners feel about trying to figure out what that really would look like. And again, until we kind of see where you land on the points. And it might be that they're just there as an aside of a discussion as we're looking at points and how that all works. Like, you know what, it really would make sense to add one of these. Could you go look at it? Does that make some sense? I don't know what your thoughts were on the amount of work you were going to do on those, but it could just be we have that points discussion and decide to focus everything purely with green items such as eco roof and trees, for instance. And if that's where we were landing and you spent a lot of time researching passive house, that would be unfortunate.
Right.
So something to think about.
Okay.
I don't know where you go with that.
Yeah, we'll figure that one out. Seems like there's leeway. So next steps before you is the hearing work session sequencing. On the left-hand column is Planning and Sustainability Commission. On the right-hand column is Design Commission. We are today at this work session number 3. As you can see, we talked about Guideline 6, and we did not talk about process, and we did not talk about public realm. So good news is our standards working group is going to meet very beginning of the year, January 2nd. They have agreed to meet for 3 hours. We're going to pick up and hopefully do the same sorting mechanism that we did for today's discussion. And hopefully we can get through public realm and context at that meeting so we can come prepared at the January 28th meeting to talk about both of those standards in those groups. Some commissioners have also talked about, they have provided us with amendments to the thresholds, which we did not provide you with today because we were not going to talk about it. We also have the outstanding issue of how does design review and design standards contribute to cost, and we haven't been able to frame that for today's conversation, so we want to come back to you about that. Given how today's conversation went, Well, we'll do the best we can. And it seems like DOZA might take a little longer to get through the PSC. And we'll just, if we have your patience, we'll just stick with it and keep going forward. If you have suggestions for how we could have done the standards today in a more expeditious fashion, that would be great. Yes.
One idea is that if people have not already submitted ideas, please do so to the standards group ahead of our meeting, because we can, as an outcome of that meeting, including the one you were mentioning earlier, we can really do some triage on that. And I would suggest that at the next time we go through the next batch of standards, that we actually just note, because everything is either consent or discuss, and the assumption is we don't hit every item. We just go straight to the discuss one to skip everything else. If people haven't raised the issue by then, I mean, it's never too late, you can always raise your hand, but that would just, I think, have more velocity through the items.
Yes. If we get comments from more commissioners. I knew some.
I say whether or not we get comments from commissioners, we should take that approach. I'm sort of, as someone who put a lot of time in to give comments early, I think that, and some other people did the same. I mean, we now have more time until the end of the calendar year to get in last comments, but I mean, it's never too late to raise your hand and to intercept and say, hey, I want to raise an issue, but I would rather that be the norm that we just do the discussion items unless someone intercepts.
Okay, are we comfortable with that? That's what we'll do next time. And I think I had already moved the 3x3 down. I'm going to move the 3x3 date out. I just haven't had a chance to check with Julie on the PSC's calendar to do that. But
Great.
Sooner we can get to a specific date beyond a week of would be helpful.
maybe after we're done with Design Commission on Thursday. So we'll see where they are with their discussions. Okay?
Great, thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned.